Chapter 49 of The Fortunes of Perkin Warbeck by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Lauren Huff. Chapter 49. Richard Surrenders. For when Simocles saw the foul reproach which him appeached, pricked with noble shame, and inward grief, he fiercely gan approach, resolved to put away that loathly blame, or die with honour and desert of fame. Spenser. After the prince, by the voyage of Monina, had, as he hoped, provided for the escape and safety of the Lady Catherine, he could not, all weak as he was, remain in repose. From his early childhood he had been nurtured in the idea that it was his first, chief duty to regain his kingdom. His friends lived for that single object. All other occupation was regarded as impertinent or trifling. On the table of his ductile boyish mind, that sole intent was deeply engraved by every hand or circumstance. The base-minded disposition of his rival king adorned his cause with a show of use and the name of virtue. Those were days when every noble-born youth carved honor for himself with his sword, when passes at arms were resorted to whenever real wars did not put weapons in their hands, and men exposed their breasts to sharp-biting steel in wanton sport. Often during his green and budding youth Richard had gloried in the very obstacles set before him. To be cast out and forced to redeem his state was a brighter destiny than to be lapped in the bosom of guarded royalty. The treason of Clifford and the sacrifice of devoted friends but whetted his ambition, vengeance, the religion of that age, being a sacred duty in his eyes. He had been shaken by Lord Surrey's appeal, but cast the awakened pity off as a debasing weakness. The painted veil of life was torn. His name had not armed the nobles of his native land. His cause had not been trumpeted with praise, nor crowned by victory. Deserted by foreign allies, unsuccessful in Ireland, he had appeared at the head of a rabble army, strong only in wrongs and in revenge. Even these he had abandoned, and with nameless hinds taken sanctuary. His story was a fable, his name a jeer. He no longer, so it seemed, existed, for the appellation of Duke of York was to be lost and merged in the disgraceful misnomer affixed to him by the usurper. Richard was no whining monk to lament the inevitable, and tamely to await the result. To see an evil was to spur him to seek a remedy. He had given up every expectation of reigning, except such as sprung from his right and faith in the justice of God. But honor was a more valued treasure, and to his warm heart dearer still was the safety of the poor fellows abandoned by him. On the third day after his arrival at Beaulieu, he arose from his sick couch, donned his armor, and yet, pale and feeble, sent to speak with the cavalier who commanded the party that guarded all egress from the abbey. With him he held long parley, in conclusion of which Sir Hugh Luttrell directed 3 of his followers to be in readiness, and 2 of his chosen horses to be led to the abbey gates. Richard took leave of the abbot. He recommended his poor followers to him, and lightly answered the remonstrance of the holy man, who thought that delirium alone could urge the fugitive to quit the tranquil sacred spot, where he himself passed his days in quiet, and which held out so secure a protection to the vanquished. His remonstrance was vain. One word weighed more with Richard than a paradise of peace. Infamy, dishonor. No, even if his people were safe, by throwing himself in the selfsame peril to which he had apparently exposed them, that stain were effaced. The very gentleman to whom he had surrendered himself had trespassed on his allegiance to Henry to dissuade him from the foolhardihood of his adventure. It was a sight of pity to see one so very young walk voluntarily to the sacrifice, and the princely mien and youthful appearance of the self-constituted prisoner wrought all to compassion and respect. For still this fair white rose was in the very opening flower of manhood. He looked, after such variety of fortune, as if evil not only never had, but never could tarnish the brightness of his spirit or of his aspect. Illness had a little enfeebled him, without detracting from his youthful beauty, giving rather that softness which made it loveliness, yet painted fairer by his self-immolating resolve. A sweet regard and amiable grace mixed with manly sternness did appear, and eagerness withal, for eager he was, even to almost foolish haste, to redeem the lost hours, and establish himself again no runaway. With fresh joy he addressed himself to retrace his steps to Taunton, sanctuary and refuge from death. Oh, how he trampled on the slavish thought! Death was to him a word, a shadow, a phantom to deride and scorn, not an enemy to grapple with. Disgrace was his abhorred foe, and him he thus overthrew. His resolves, inspired by disdain of permitting one taint to blemish his career, were not the expedients of prudence, but the headlong exploit of daring youth. The iron must indeed have entered our souls, and we be tamed from dear, youthful freedom to age's humble concessions to necessity before we can bow our head to calumny, smile at the shafts as they rankle in our flesh, and calmly feel that among the many visitations of evil we undergo, this is one we are compelled to endure. Thus he, his gentle guide and followers, travelled towards Taunton. In all prudence, from the moment they left sanctuary, Sir Hugh Luttrell ought to have guarded him closely. But even the staid Sir Hugh forgot his duty. Rather was Richard the enforcer of this journey than his guard. Richard it was who at night halted unwillingly. Richard who first cried to horse at morning's dawn, who, in spite of ill weather, resisted every delay. As they drew near their bourne, the appellation of Perkin first met the prince's ear. He was unaware that it had ever been applied to him except by Henry's written proclamations. It acted as a galling spur, for he believed, with youth's incapacity for understanding systematized falsehood, that his presence would put to flight the many-colored web of invention which his rival had cast over him to mar his truth and obscure his nobility. After 3 days they drew near Taunton. The stubble fields, the flowery hedges, the plenteous orchards were passed. From a rising ground they looked upon the walls of the town, and the vacant moor where his camp had stood. Richard halted, saying, "Sir Knight, I will await you here. Do you seek your king. Say I come a voluntary sacrifice to purchase with drops of my royal blood the baser tide of my poor followers. I demand no more. Bid him rear the scaffold. Let the headsman sharpen the axe to lop off the topmost bough of Plantagenet. The price I ask is the despised lives of men, who, but that they loved me, were incapable of merit or of crime in his eyes. For their humble sakes, like my grandfather York, I am prepared to die. If pledge of this be denied me, I still am free. I wear a sword and will sell my life dearly, though alone." Sir Hugh Luttrell was perplexed. He knew the stern nature of his royal master, and how heavily he would visit on him any disappointment in his dearest wish of obtaining possession of his rival's person. The prince had, during their 3 days' companionship, gained great power over him. He felt that he was in truth the son of Edward IV, a man he had never loved, for Sir Hugh was a Lancastrian, but one whom he had feared and obeyed as his sovereign. How could he put slavish force upon this gallant offspring? He hesitated till the prince demanded, "Wherefore delay? Is there aught else that you desire?" "You pledge your knightly word," said Sir Hugh, "not to desert this spot." "Else wherefore am I here? This is idle. Yet so to content you, I swear by my vow made under the walls of Granada, by Our Lady, and by the blessed saints, I will abide here." The knight rode into the town with his followers, leaving young Richard impatient for the hour that was to deliver him to servitude. Sir Hugh first sought Lord Daubeny, requesting him to obtain for him instant audience of the king. "His Grace," said the noble, "is at vespers, or about to attend them." "I dare not wait till they are said," replied Luttrell, who every minute felt the burden of responsibility weighing heavier on him. "Nor I interrupt his majesty, even now he enters the church." In haste Sir Hugh crossed the street, and as the king took the holy water from the chalice, he knelt before him. The few words he spoke painted Henry's face with exulting gladness. "We thank thee, good Sir Hugh," he said, "and will make our thanks apparent. By the mass, thou hast deserved well of us this day. Where hast thou bestowed our counterfeit?" "Please your majesty, he awaits your highness's acceptance of his conditions without the eastern gate." "You have placed strong guard over him?" "He pledged his oath to await my return. He is alone." A dark, angry frown chased all glee from Tudor's brow. Bending a stern glance on his erewhile welcome messenger, he commanded Lord Wells, his cousin, to take a strong force and to seize this Duke of runaways. Sir Hugh, timid as he was, interfered. Driven by respect for his prisoner, and fear of what might ensue, he tried to enforce York's stipulation. Henry looked on him with scorn, then said, "Truly, cousin, I have vaunted of a bloodless conquest. So let not the blood of the misborn traitor stain our laurels, nor Sir Luttrell's Duke Perkin shed one precious ruby drop. Say aye to all he asks, for as it seems his demands are as foolish as himself, and need no chaffering. Tell him that his life is safe, but bring him here. Set him within our ward and limitation. Do this, while we with a Te Deum thank our Heavenly Father for his watchful mercies. Sir Hugh, accompany our cousin, and then wend your way whither it please you. We have no pleasure in your presence." Thus duped, even by his own generous proud spirit, the Duke of York became a prisoner, delivering up his sword, and yielding himself an easy prey to his glad victor. Once, twice, thrice, as he waited the return of Luttrell, it had crossed his mind not to fly, his vow being pledged, but to remember that he was now free and unconstrained, and would soon be in others' thrall, when farewell to the aspiring thought, the deed of arms, and to the star of his life, whose idea, now his purpose was accomplished, he fondly turned. "Poor Catherine," he whispered, "this is the crown, the fated, fallen youth, the seer foretold." In aftertimes that scene dwelt on his memory. He called to mind the evening-tide, for the sun was down, and the clouds, lately gold-besprent, waxing dun, as the town walls grew high and dark, and the few trees about him waved fitfully in a soft breeze. That wind was free, and could career over the plain. What spell bound the noble knight and stalwart steed, that they coursed not also free as it? In a few minutes he was a prisoner, and led within those darksome walls. At first, treated with some observance, he was unaware, as is the case in any new position, with whose circumstances and adjuncts we are unacquainted, how utterly he had fallen. He was led to no barred prison, and for a time the nobles and knights who flocked to see him were no bad exchange for the motley crew he had quitted. But, as if in a dream, he felt gather round him, impalpable but adamantine walls, chains hung upon his limbs, not the less heavy because the iron pierced his soul rather than his flesh. He had been a free man, his name was attended with love and respect, and his aspect commanded the obedience of men. Now the very appellation given to him was a mortal insult. A stranger seemed to be spoken to when he was addressed, and yet he must answer. He was never alone, and night was the sole suspension from the insulting curiosity of the crowd. He must forego himself, grow an impostor in his own eyes, take on him the shameful name of Perkin, all which native honor and memory of his princess bride made trebly stinging. To barb the dart came intelligence that the Lady Catherine was a prisoner. King Henry had quitted Taunton and gone towards Exeter, when on his arrival there the Earl of Oxford presented the Scottish princess to him. Praises of her wondrous beauty became rife, brought by some of the king's train, returned to Taunton. Praises so excessive and warm as could not have been inspired by celestial beauty in adversity, if not egged on by some adventitious stimulant. It was the fashion to speak of her as the Queen of Loveliness, as, for beauty's sake the name belonged to her, the fairest white rose that ever grew on thorny bush. By this name she was mentioned to York, and it visited his heart as the first gleam of sunshine on his enshadowed misery. Dear was the name of the white rose to the fallen one. It had been his own in fresh and happy days, when first he showed his prowess among the knights of France and Burgundy. Still louder grew the echo of some mighty voice that gave forth encomium of the prisoner's bride, and the smiles with which some spoke, smiles half of wonder, half of mockery, told of some secret charm which at last was openly commented upon. Again the king saw the fair one yestermorn, and dallied ere he granted the earnest suit she made, as if he loved to be entreated. The grave King Henry caught in the net of the wanton boy. Oh, this were subject for a ballad for the nonce. Blithe news for gentle Perkin, his wife thrives at court. She takes occasion by too slender a hold, if she raise not her husband from the kitchen to a higher place at court. Now we shall see our lady the queen jealous of her liege. Our queen? What midsummer's dream is this? The white rose will never flower in our court garden. To falsify this assertion came the next day a messenger with command to convey the noble prisoner with all speed to London, and for the attendance of the Lady Cheney and the Lady Howard, two noble matrons, to wait on the Lady Catherine, who was about to proceed to Westminster. Smiles and whispers were interchanged, and when to this was added that as much courtesy should be shown the counterfeit youth as might not endanger his safekeeping, the light laugh followed. Though, as if to meet and overthrow the raillery, it was added this was ordered for his royal wife's sake, who was cousin to England's dear ally, the King of Scotland. These idle tales did not reach York's ear. Wherever he showed himself, he enforced such personal respect that there was no likelihood that any conjecture, linked with his lady's name, would be hazarded before him. He was told that the king entertained her royally, and when he heard that she was to be presented to his sister, the Queen Elizabeth, a thrill of joy passed into his heart. His sister! As a boy he remembered the fair, kind girl whom he had called his loved and most sweet sister. He knew that she was conscious of his truth, and, though wedded to his rival, loved not her lord. It was a pleasing dream to fancy these gentle ladies together, to know that, while the one spoke her affection and praise, the other must feel the kindred blood warm in her heart, and proudly, though sadly, acknowledge him her worthy brother. End of chapter 49. Chapter 50 of The Fortunes of Perkin Warbeck by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Lauren Huff. Chapter 50. A Procession. They are noble sufferers. I marvel how they'd have looked, had they been victors, that with such a constant nobility enforce a freedom out of bondage. Two noble kinsmen. The vulgar rabble, fond of any sort of show, were greedy of this new one. In all parts the name of the Duke of York, of the counterfeit Perkin, drew a concourse of gazers. The appetite was keenest in London, and many a tawdry mask and mime was put in motion, to deck the streets through which the defeated youth was to pass. Vainly, he entered London at night, and was conducted privately to Westminster. What strange thing was this? What mark of reality did his very forehead wear, that Henry, so prodigal of contumely on his foes, dared not bring him forward for the public gaze? One man was put in the stocks for a similar remark, and on the following day it was suddenly proclaimed that Perkin would go in procession from Westminster to St. Paul's and back again. A troop of horse at the appointed hour left the palace. In the midst of them rode a fair young gentleman, whose noble mien and gallant bearing gave lustre to his escort. His sweet aspect, his frank soft smile and lively but calm manner, had no trace of constraint or debasement. He is unarmed. Is that Perkin? No, the Earl of Warwick. He is a prince, sure, yet that is he. Such murmurs sped around. At some little distance followed another burlesque procession. A poor fellow, a Cornishman, who was tied to an ass, his face to the tail, and the beast now proceeding lazily, now driven by sticks, now kicking, now galloping, made an ill-fashioned mirth for the multitude. Whether, as York was not to be disgraced in his own person, the contumely was to reach him through this poor rogue, or whether the eyes of men were to be drawn from him to the rude mummery which followed, could only be guessed. The last was the effect produced. Richard heard mass at St. Paul's, and returned to Westminster unmolested by insult. It seemed but as if some young noble made short pilgrimage from one city to the other to accomplish a vow. The visit of ill-fated Warwick to the cathedral before the Battle of Stoke had more in it of humiliating ostentation. He returned to the Palace of Westminster. A few weeks he spent in mingled curiosity and anxiety concerning his future destiny. It was already accomplished. Modern times could not present anything more regular and monotonous than the way of life imposed upon him. It was like the keeping of a lunatic, who, though now sane, might be momentarily expected to break out in some dangerous explosion, rather than the confining of a state prisoner. 4 armed attendants, changed every 8 hours, constantly guarded him, never moving, according to the emphatic language of old chroniclers, the breadth of a nail from his side. He attended early mass each morning. He was permitted to take 1 hour's ride on every evening that was not a festival. 2 large gloomy chambers with barred windows were allotted him. Among his guards he quickly perceived that the same faces seldom appeared, and the most rigorous silence, or monosyllabic discourse, was imposed upon them. Harsher measures were perhaps spared from respect to his real birth, or his alliance with the King of Scotland. Yet greater severity had been less tantalizing. As it was, the corpse in the grass-grown grave was not more bereft of intercourse with the sunny world than the caged Duke of York. From his windows he looked upon a deserted courtyard. In his rides, purposely directed to unfrequented spots, he now and then saw a few human beings. Such name could be hardly bestowed on his stony-faced, stony-hearted guards. Richard was the very soul of sympathy. He could muse for hours in solitude, but it must be upon dear argument, that had for its subject the pleasures, interests, or affections of others. He could not entertain a heartless intercourse. Wherever he saw the human countenance, he beheld a fellow creature, and, duped 1,000 times, and 1,000 times deceived, still he must love. To spend the hour in sportive talk, fondly to interchange the gentle offices of domestic life, to meet peril and endure misery with others, to give away himself and then return to his inner being, laden like a bee with gathered sweets, to pile up in his storehouse, memory, the treasured honey of friendship and love, and then away to nestle in the bosom of his own dear flower, and drink up more, or gaily to career the golden fields. Such was his nature, and now, this was worse loneliness, this commune with the mutes of office, to be checked by low-born men, to feel that he must obey the beck of an hireling. A month interspersed with hopes of change. He had endured the degradation. Now he began to meditate escape. Yet he paused. Where was Catherine? Where his many zealous friends? The Lady Catherine was in an apartment of the palace whose arched and fretted roof and thick buttresses were well adapted to impart a feeling of comfortable seclusion from the rough elements without. The dullness of dark November was gladdened by a huge wood fire. The little Prince of Wales was narrating some strange story of fairyland, and bluff Harry was setting 2 dogs to quarrel, and then beating his favourite for not conquering, which seeing, his sister Margaret drew the animal from him to console and caress it. The gentle queen bent over her embroidery. Listening she was to her favourite Arthur, interrupting him with playful questions and exclamations, while Catherine now kindly attended to the boy, now turned anxiously at every sound. She rose at last. "Surely vespers are ringing from the abbey. My lord the king promised to see me before vespers." "My lord the king is very gracious to you, sweet one," said Elizabeth. "Methinks by nature he is gracious," replied the princess. "At least, I have ever found him so. Surely the shackles of state are very heavy, or ere this he would have granted my prayer, which he has listened to so oft indulgently." The queen smiled faintly, and again pursued her work with seeming earnestness. Was it jealousy that dimmed the silk of her growing rosebud by a tear, or what name shall we give to the feeling? Envy we may not call it, she was too sweetly good, which now whispered, "Even he, the cold, the stern, is kind to her. My brother loves her passionately, and many a lance has been broken for her. Happy girl, happy in adversity, while I, England's miserable queen, am forgotten even by my fellow prisoner of Sheriff Hutton, poor Warwick. He might have been my refuge. For the rest, how hard and rocky seem all human hearts to me." Her tears now flowed fast. Catherine saw them. She approached her, saying, "Dear and royal lady, none should weep, methinks, but only I, whose mate is caged and kept away. None sigh but poor Kate, whose more than life hangs on state policy. Or is it for him these tears are shed?" Still Elizabeth wept. Accustomed to the excess of self-restraint, timid, schooled to patience, but with the proud, fiery spirit of a Plantagenet, tamed, not dead within her, she could be silent, but not speak by halves. The very natural vivacity of her nature made her disdain not to have her will when once it was awaked. She struggled against her rising feeling. She strove to suppress her emotion, but at last she spoke, and once again, after the 10 years that had elapsed since her mother's imprisonment, truth was imaged by her words. To none could she have addressed herself better. The life of the Scottish princess had been spent in administering balm to wounded minds. The same soft eloquence, the same persuasive counsels that took the sting of remorse from her royal cousin's conscience, was spent upon the long-hidden sorrows of the neglected wife, the humbled woman. From her own sensitive mind she culled the knowledge which taught her where and how peace and resignation were to be found. The piety that mingled with her talk was the religion of love. Her philosophy was mere love, and it was the spirit of love, now kindling the balmy atmosphere of charity to many, now concentred in one point, but ever ready to soothe human suffering with its soft influence, that dwelt upon her lips and modulated her silver voice. Elizabeth felt as if she had wandered long in a wolf-haunted wild, now suddenly changed to a fairy domain, fresh and beautiful as a poet's dream. Timidly she feared to set her untaught feet within the angel-guarded precincts. The first effect of her new friend's eloquence was to make her speak. After years of silence, to utter her very inner thoughts, her woman's fears, her repinings, her aversions, her lost hopes and affections crushed. She spent her bitterest words, but thus it was as if she emptied a silver chalice of its gall to be refilled by Catherine with heavenly dew. The weeks of baffled expectation grew into months. It is a dreary portion of our existence when we set our hearts upon an object which recedes as we approach, and yet entices us on. The king's courtesy and smiles, and evident pleasure in her society, gave birth to warm hopes in the bosom of the princess. She had asked to share her husband's prison. She had besought to be permitted to see him. It seemed from Henry's vague but consolatory answers that tomorrow she would receive even more than her desires. The disappointment of the morrow, which she lamented bitterly at first, then grew into the root whence fresh hopes sprang again, to be felled by the cruel axe again to shoot forth. The sickening sensation of despair crept over her sometimes. Her very struggles to master it enfeebled her, and yet she did conquer all but the hard purposes of the tyrant. Now a messenger was to be dispatched to Scotland. Now he expected one thence. Now an embassy from Burgundy. He implored her patience, and talked back the smiles into her saddened countenance. He was almost sincere at first, not in his excuses, but in his desire to please her at any sacrifice. But this disinterested wish grew soon into a mere grasping at self-gratification. In a little while he hoped she would be persuaded how vain it was to expect that he should set free so dangerous a rival, and yet he did not choose to extinguish all her anticipations, for perhaps then she would desire to return to her native country, and Henry would have sacrificed much to keep her where he could command her society. Thus he encouraged her friendship with the queen, though he wondered how one so wise, so full of reflection and reason as Catherine could love his feeble-minded wife. The king underrated the talents of Elizabeth. This hapless woman had perceived that contention was useless. She therefore conceded everything without a struggle. Her energies, spent upon endurance, made her real strength of mind seem tameness, but Catherine read with clearer eyes. We are all and each of us riddles, when unknown one to the other. The plain map of human powers and purposes helps us not at all to thread the labyrinth each individual presents in his involution of feelings, desires, and capacities. And we must resemble, in quickness of feeling, instinctive sympathy, and warm benevolence, the lovely daughter of Huntley, before we can hope to judge rightly of the good and virtuous among our fellow creatures. The strangest sight of all was to see Henry act a lover's part. At first he was wholly subdued. So easy is to appease the stormy wind, of malice in the calm of pleasant womankind. Even generosity and magnanimity, disguises he sometimes wore the better to conceal his inborn littleness of soul, almost possessed him. For a moment he forgot his base exultation in crushing a foe, and for a moment dwelt with genuine pleasure on the reflection that it was in his power to gratify her every wish, and to heap benefits on one so lovely and so true. When first she was presented to him, in all the calm majesty of her self-conquering mood, her stainless loveliness had such effect that surely he could deny her nothing, and when she asked that no foul dishonor should be put upon her lord, he granted almost before she asked. His expressions of service and care were heartfelt, and she lost every fear as she listened. When custom, which with man is the devourer of holy enthusiasm, changed his purer feelings into something he dared not name, he continued to manifest the same feelings which had bested him so well at first, and to angle with his prey. Though he scarcely knew what he wished, for 1,000 worldly motives sufficed to check any dishonorable approach, it was enough that she was there, that, when she saw him, her countenance lighted up with pleasure, that with the sweetest grace she addressed her entreaties to his ear, not in abrupt demands, but in such earnest prayer, such yielding again to return with another and another argument, that often he thought, even if he had wished to concede, he would hold out a little longer, that still her sweet voice might address him, still her stately neck be bent imploring as she fixed her blue eyes on him. It was very long before the artless girl suspected that he had any other intent but to consent at last to her supplications. As it was as easy to him to lure her on with a greater as a lesser hope, she even fancied that, under certain restrictions, York's freedom might be restored, and that with him in some remote country she might bless Tudor as a generous adversary. Elizabeth was afraid to discover the truth to her, for she also dreaded to lose her, and was afraid that, on the failure of her hopes, she would seek to return to Scotland, or at least seclude herself from her husband's jailer. Monina first awoke her to the truth. Monina, who had been to Brussels to consult with the Duchess Margaret and Lady Brampton, and who came back full of projects for her friend's escape, heard with amazement and scorn the false lures held out by Henry. She impatiently put aside every inducement for delay, and with rash but determined zeal, framed many a scheme for communicating with him, and contriving means for his flight. He himself, the chained eagle, was sick at heart. No word, no breath, no hope. Had all forgotten him? Was he, yet living, erased from the lists of memory, cut off from the beloved beings in whom he had confided, through their own act, no longer a part of their thoughts, their lives, themselves? Stood he alone in this miserable world, allied to it by hate only, the hate borne to him by his foe? Such gloomy misgivings were so alien to his nature that they visited him as cruel iron torture visits soft human flesh. That she, the life of his life, should be false and cold, each friend forgetful, Monina, Plantagenet, all. Oh, to stretch his quivering frame upon burning coals had been to slumber on a bed of roses in comparison with the agony these thoughts administered. His calmer moods, when he believed that, though tardy, they were true, were scarcely less painful. When the real state of things grew more galling, the bluntness or silence of his keepers, their imperturbable or rude resistance to his questions, the certainty that if one answered graciously, that one he should see no more. Often he felt as if he could not endure his present position 1 hour longer. Fits of hope, meditations on escape checkered his days, so that all was not so dark. But the transition from one emotion to another, each to end in blank despair, tasked his mercurial soul. Patience died within him. He might perish in the attempt, but he would be free. Urged by Monina, by her own awakening fears, and above all by the keen burning desire of her heart, the Lady Catherine became very importunate with the crafty monarch to be permitted an interview with her lord. Henry was in no mood to grant her request. The 1,000 designs he had meditated to disgrace his victim he had given up for her sake, because he would not refuse himself the pleasure of seeing her, and feared to behold aversion and horror mark an aspect hitherto all smiles towards him. The same fear, nurtured by the expressions of her tender affection, made him hesitate, ere he should endeavor to convince her that she had misallied herself to an impostor. Indeed, when at last he ventured to frame a speech bearing such meaning, her answer told him that if he could have changed the royal York into base-born Perkin, the young and innocent wife would still cling to him whom she had pledged her vows, to whom she had given herself, whose own, in heaven's and her own eyes, she unalienably was. But now Henry, grown more callous as time elapsed, coined a new scheme, vile as his own soul. He resolved, by acting on her woman's fears, tenderness, and weakness, to make her the instrument of persuading her lord to some damning confession that must stamp him as a deceiver forever. This bright project animated him to fresh endeavors to please, and her with fresh hopes. Yet he paused a little before he sought to execute it. Winter crept on into spring, and spring ripened into summer, and still the various actors in this tragic drama were spending their lives, their every thought and heart's pulsation on one object. Richard had latterly received intimation that he would be permitted an interview with his beloved White Rose, and a week or 2 more were patiently endured with this expectation. Catherine each day believed that on the morrow she should see him, whom now she conversed with only in her nightly dreams, and woke each morning to find him fled with them. Some change approached. Henry's promises became more clear in their expression, his assertions more peremptory. He would at last name his conditions, which she was to communicate to her lord. Even Elizabeth almost dared to hope. Monina alone, deeply impressed with a belief in the malice of Tudor, was incredulous, and reluctantly yielded to Catherine's request to suspend yet a little while her plots. Whitsuntide arrived, and Henry at last would decide. This festival was to be spent at Sheen. Thither the royal family went, accompanied by the princess, who vanquished her disappointment at further delay, not to appear an ingrate to the fair promising king. Indeed, in the secure hope she cherished of again seeing him who was her earthly paradise, she smiled through the very heart-gushing tears expectation caused to flow. On Whitsunday she awoke, resolving to discard the heavy load of anticipated evil that involuntarily weighed at her heart. She knelt at Mass and fervently strove to resign her dearest wishes to the direction of her God. And yet that she should see him again soon, oh, how very soon, filled her with such dizzy rapture that her orisons were forgot midway, remembered and turned to thanksgivings, till she recollected that still her hope was unfulfilled, and fear awoke, and with tears and prayer she again strove to ease her agitated heart. That very night a thunderstorm roused her from slumber, with those unexplained emotions which, in fateful periods, make so large a portion of our lives. She felt as if every clap spoke audibly some annunciation which she could not interpret, as if every lurid flash were sent to disclose a sight which yet she could not see. At length the rain ceased, the thunder grew distant, the lightning faint, a load was lifted from her soul. She slept with the firm belief that on the morrow tidings, not all evil, would be brought from London. Some tidings surely came. What they were she was not permitted to know. For the first time Henry made her a real prisoner. She was carefully guarded, and none were allowed to speak to her. Overwrought by her expectations, this seemed a frightful cruelty, and yet, where caution was used, there must be fear. Her, his enemy, feared. Then good had occurred. She dared not permit her imagination to picture forth the thing which yet was forever present to it. And while all else were amazed to hear that York had escaped and fled, his lovely, anxious wife, cut off from communication with all, knew only that she alone was ignorant of what she would have given her life to learn. End of chapter 50. Chapter 51 of The Fortunes of Perkin Warbeck by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Lauren Huff. Chapter 51. An Escape. Thou god of winds that reignest in the seas, that reignest also in the continent, at last blow up some gentle gale of ease, the which may bring my ship ere it be rent, unto the gladsome port of her intent. Spenser. During the winter and the untoward late spring, Richard had endured his captivity. The warm, happy summer season, calling all nature to a jubilee, at first saddened, then animated him to contrive new projects of escape. The promised interview with his white rose tempted him to delay, while an inner spirit rebelled even against this dear enticement, and bade him fly. On the evening of the 9th of June, he was permitted to attend vespers in a secluded chapel of Westminster Abbey. During the short passage from the palace to the cathedral, it seemed to him as if a new life were awake everywhere, an unknown power on the eve of liberating him. Never before had he prayed so fervently for freedom. The pealing organ, the dim, arched, venerable vault above, acted as stimulants to his roused and eager soul. He stood tiptoe, as on the eve of the accomplishment of his desire. A deep and awful sound suddenly shook the building. A glaring, lurid flash filled with strange brilliancy the long, dark aisle. A clap of thunder, loud and swiftly repeated, reverberated along the heavens. The shrill scream of women answered the mighty voice. The priest who read the service saw his sacred book glared on by so keen a flash as blinded him to the dimmer light that succeeded. Every being in the church sank on their knees, crossing themselves, and striving to repeat their paternosters and aves, while Richard stood fearless, enjoying the elemental roar, exulting in the peal, the flash, the tempestuous havoc, as powers yet rebellious to his conqueror. Freedom was victorious in the skiey plains. There was freedom in the careering clouds, freedom in the sheeted lightning, freedom in the cataract of sound that tore its way along. On his poor heart, sick of captivity and enforced obedience, the sweet word liberty hung as a spell. Every bird and tiny fly he had envied as being free, how much more things more powerful, the chainless destruction of nature. The voice of God speaking in his own consecrated abode was terrible to all, soothing to himself alone. He walked to the southern entrance of the edifice to mark the splashing shower, as it plowed the stones. 2 of his keepers remained on their knees, paralyzed by terror. The 2 others followed trembling. At that moment, a louder, a far, far louder clap burst right above them, succeeding so instantaneously the blinding flash, that while every object was wrapped in flame, the pavement and fretted roof of the abbey shook with the sound. A bolt had fallen. The priest at the altar was struck. With mingled horror and curiosity, one of York's remaining guards rushed towards the spot. The only remaining one was kneeling in an agony of terror. York stood on the threshold of the porch. He advanced a few steps beyond. A new fear possessed the fellow. "He will escape! Hello! James! Martin!" The very words imparted the thought to the prince, who, filled erewhile with wonder and religious awe, had forgotten his own sad plight. He turned to the man, who was doubtful whether to rush into the chapel for his comrades, or singly to seize his prisoner. His dagger was drawn. "Put up that foolish steel," said York. "It cannot harm one whom God calls to freedom. Listen, he speaks. Farewell." The lightning again flashed. With blue and forked flame it ran along the blade of the weapon raised against him. With a shriek the man dashed it to the earth. Richard was already out of sight. The rain poured in torrents. It came down in continuous cataracts from the eaves of the houses. On this sunny festival few had remained at home. and those, terror-stricken now, were on their knees. No creature was in the streets as the fugitive sped on, ignorant whither he should go. London was a vast, unknown labyrinth to him. As well as he could divine, he directed his flight eastward, and that with such velocity that he might compete with a horse in full career. If any saw him as thus with winged heels he flew along, they did not wonder that a person should hasten to shelter out of the storm. It was of slight regard to him that rain and hail ploughed the earth, and continued thunder echoed through the sky, that alone and friendless he fled through the streets of his victor's chief city. His exulting heart, his light, glad spirit told him that he was free. If for a few minutes only, he would joyfully purchase with his life those few minutes' emancipation from his frightful thraldom. No words could speak, no thought image the supreme gladness of that moment. Meanwhile, dark night, aided by the thick clouds which still poured down torrents of rain, had crept over the dim twilight, and began to embarrier with doubt the path of the rejoicing fugitive. He found at last that the lines of houses receded, and that he was in an open space, in the midst of which rose a gigantic shadow, stretching itself in stillness and vastness on the summit of the rising ground before him. It was the Cathedral of St. Paul's. Now, cloaked by the dark and inclement night, he began to reflect on his actual situation. London might swarm with his partisans, but he knew not where to find one. Probably all those who were occupied by his fate resided in Westminster, whence he had precipitately fled, whither assuredly he would not return. These reflections perplexed him, but in no way allayed his transport at finding himself free. He felt that if he wandered to the wide fields and died of hunger there, it were bliss enough to see the sky unclouded by his dungeon roof, to behold the woods, the flowers, and the dancing waves, nor be mocked with man's shape, when those who wore it had sold man's dearest privilege, that of allowing his actions to wait upon the free impulses of his heart. Still, therefore, he hurried along, and finally became completely bewildered in some swampy low fields, intersected by wide ditches. The night was pitchy dark, nor was there any clue afforded him by which he could even guess whether he might not be returning on his path. Suddenly a small ray of light threaded the gloom. It went and came, and at last remained stationary. With wavering will and irregular steps, the prince proceeded towards it, for he would rather have died where he stood than discover himself, so to fall again into captivity. Once or twice he lost sight of this tiny earth star, which evidently shone through some low casement, and as at last he caught sight of the solitary miserable hut where it was sphered, the recollection of his former asylum, of ill-fated Jane Shore's penurious dwelling, flashed across him. With speedy, reassured pace he hurried on, leaping a ditch that obstructed his path, careless of every physical obstacle, when the malice of man was no longer to be apprehended. Poor Jane, he ejaculated, and again he reflected with some wonder that, in every adversity, women had been his resource and support. Their energies, their undying devotion and enthusiasm were the armor and weapons with which he had defended himself from and attacked fortune. Even one so fallen and so low as poor Jane Shore was, through the might of fidelity and affection, of more avail than all his doughty partisans, who, in the hour of need, were scattered and forgetful. The low-roofed cot was before him unmistaken. The crevice whence the light emanated was too small to admit his inquiring glance. Amid the driving, pattering rain, he fancied that he distinguished voices within. But with a boldness which bade him fear nothing, he lifted the latch, and beheld in truth a sight of wonder. Monina, with a shriek, started from her seat. She folded him with wild joy in her fair arms, and then, blushing and trembling, threw herself on the neck of Lady Brampton. And Jane herself rose from her couch of straw, more wan, more emaciated than ever. Yet even over her sad pale face a smile wandered, showing in yet more ghastly hues the ruin it illumined. Questions, ejaculations, wonder, and delight burst from every lip. "He is here to our wish. The means of escape are secured, and he is here. Oh, dearest Lady Brampton, do not the blessed angels guard him?" Monina spoke, and her soft luminous eyes were fixed on him as if not daring to believe the vision. It was not the chastened delight of age, but the burning, ardent joy of a young heart, who had but one thought, one desire, and that about to be accomplished. Her flushed cheeks betokened her rapture. "I have repined, despaired, almost blasphemed. Yet he is here. How good is Almighty God! Listen, dear my lord, how wondrously opportune your arrival is. Lady Brampton will tell you all. Oh, this new miracle is the Blessed Virgin's own achievement. You are free. Scarcely less animated, the zealous lady detailed the circumstances that united so favorably for him. She had been for some time at Brussels with the Duchess Margaret, who was more grieved than could be imagined at the capture of her beloved nephew. She lived in a state of terror on his account. That his life was a while spared availed little to pacify her. The midnight murders and prison assassinations, so rife during the wars of York and Lancaster, were present to her imagination. She exhausted every device, every bribe to gain partisans for him to achieve his freedom. Among others, most liberal of promises was the false Clifford. After Richard had escaped from him in the New Forest, he fell in with Frion, whose double plot being defeated, he strove to capture and accuse the accomplice whom, in fact, he had deceived. The knight fled, he escaped to the Low Countries, and by a glozing tale easily gained the ear of the Duchess. Lost in England, perhaps he wished to rebuild his fallen fortunes. Aided by her munificence, perhaps he prepared some new treachery. Whatever it might be, he was trusted, and was the soul of the present enterprise. De Ferro's vessel, refitted and well manned, was now anchored in the mouth of the Thames. Clifford undertook the task of foisting some creature of his own, or even himself disguised, of undertaking the part of one of Richard's keepers, when he doubted not to be able to secure his flight. With her usual vivacity, Lady Brampton gave this account, but no explanations on her part could dissipate the horror York felt at the name of Clifford, or inspire him with anything but distrust of his intentions. Monina, before silenced by her sanguine associates, now gave expression to the terror and abhorrence this interference occasioned. She had come, exposing herself to 1,000 perils and pains, merely that she might watch over his acts and awaken her too credulous friends to a knowledge of his duplicity. But the danger was past. Before Clifford could know that he had escaped, York might reach the Adelaide. Almost as an answering echo to these words, there was a sound of hurrying steps. "It is he, the traitor comes. Oh, bar the door!" There was no bar, no mode of securing this dwelling of penury. 3 women alone were his guard. Monina, pale and trembling. Lady Brampton, endeavoring to reassure her, while Richard stood forward, his gaze fixed on the opening door, whose latch was already touched, resolved to meet with perfect show of frank reliance and intrepidity the intruders. Sir Robert Clifford entered. Confusion, attempted boldness, and last, sullen malice painted his aspect when he beheld the prince. He was much changed, and looked almost an old man. His dark and profuse hair was grizzled, his grey eyes hollow, and his dress, though that of a cavalier, exhibited signs of habitual neglect. His person, always slight, had been redeemed from insignificance by its exquisite grace and elegance. Every trace of this was flown, and his haggard countenance and diminutive size made even York scarcely credit that this was indeed the gay, reckless Robin. His resolve had been already made. He addressed him kindly, saying, "Sir Robert, I hear that you are willing to renew to me your broken vows. May you hereafter keep them more faithfully." Clifford muttered a few words. He looked towards the door, as if desirous of escape. He struggled with shame, guilt, and some other emotion. As soon as a consultation began as to the means to be adopted for the prince to reach the sea in safety, he conquered himself, entering into it with spirit and zeal. The plan he proposed was crafty, his own part in it the principal. He spoke of disguising the prince as a female attendant on Monina, of his and O'Waters accompanying them along the river banks as soon as daylight. And wherefore not now? Or rather, wherefore even now do we not hasten to the Thames and seize a boat? "Because," said Clifford, interrupting Monina, "His Highness's flight is already known. A line of boats intersects the Thames below London Bridge, and lower still every craft is on the alert." Each one exchanged looks. The knight continued, "You all distrust me, and I wonder not. I am in your power now. Here are my unarmed hands. Even a woman may bind them. Go forth yourselves. Seek the path to the sea. Before an hour elapses, the Duke will be again a prisoner. You may in this wild spot plant your daggers in my heart to avenge, but that will not save him, for I have no power here. But set me free, confide to my care, and by the God that made me, he walks the deck of the Adelaide ere the setting sun. I could tell you how this can be, and ye would not the more trust me if I spoke of such alliance with, such power over the rogues and vagabonds of this saintly city, as enables me to move strange engines to execute my will. Even if you credited me, you would disdain that your hero should owe his life to such base means. Be it as you will. Believe me, and I pledge my life that his grace will ride the dancing waves beyond King Henry's reach tomorrow night." "I accept the pledge," replied York. who had eyed him earnestly as he spoke. "I commit myself to your care. Act speedily, without fear of balk or suspicion on my part." Clifford's lips curled into a triumphant smile, because again he was trusted, or because again he would betray. It was hard to divine. "I must beseech your patience in the first place," said Sir Robert. "I cannot get the fitting disguises during the night." "Night is no more," replied Richard, throwing open the casement, and the dusky room was illuminated by the day. In the east there was a very fountain of light, which, welling up, flooded the flecked and broken clouds with rosy hues. The stars were gone. A soft azure peeped between the breaking vapors. The morning air was deliciously fresh. The birds chirped. A distant watchdog barked. Otherwise all was silent, and security seemed to walk the earth. "I will go seek the needful dresses," said Clifford. "Your grace will await my return, even though my stay, lengthened beyond my expectation, give me some reason for the distrust I read in every eye." "It is but too natural," said the prince, "that my kind friends should suspect you. For myself, I have said the word. I place myself in your hands. Half measures were of no avail. If indeed you are a traitor, bring Tudor's hirelings here to seize their prey. I cannot fear, I will not doubt, and if in my soul any suspicion lurk, my actions shall not be guided by it. Go, let your return be speedy or otherwise, I await you here." Scarcely had the door closed when Monina, whose eyes had been fixed on Clifford's countenance during the whole scene, exclaimed, "This moment is our own. Fly, my prince. Trust me. I know that bad man. If he find you here when he returns, you are lost." "Hist!" Jane spoke the word, and a dead silence fell upon the anxious band. The steps of a horse were heard. Monina flew to the casement. "It is our faithful Irish friend, my lord. It is O'Water." The door was opened, and each one crowded round the visitant. He uttered a "by the mischief," which sounded like a benediction when he saw the Duke of York, adding, "All is well, all in readiness. I left the Adelaide after the storm yester evening in safe anchorage." "Oh yes, safety," cried the enthusiastic Spaniard. "Safety or death. Trust not false Clifford. Seize the fleeting precious opportunity. O'Water's horse." "Is blown," said Richard. "He cannot carry me." "And the way's strangely beset," said the mayor. "Just now I saw a young gentleman seized, much to his annoyance, by some patrol. He bribed dearly, but they would not listen. The whole country is alarmed." "I will wait for Clifford," continued York, "and trust in Providence. Some kind friend only bestow a dagger on me. I would not be taken like an unarmed girl." "A tramp of steeds. They are coming. Clifford guides them hither. We are lost," cried Lady Brampton. "Oh, fly, fly, my liege," said O'Water. "Expose not these women to the assault. Poor Rose Blanche can yet bear you fast and far." The sound as of a troop of horse neared. The prince saw O'Water blocking up the casement, and then draw his sword. Monina, wild with agony, fell at his feet. "Fly, my lord. Fly for the Lady Catherine's sake. Fly for mine own. Must I see you die? I who have lived, alas, how vainly! Lady Brampton, beseech, command. He must fly. Oh, they will be here to seize, to murder him." "Here is my dagger, my lord," said O'Water coolly. "Defend yourself meanwhile, now at our last hour, for surely it is come. Our Lady recommend us to God's holy grace." The gallop of a troop grew yet more distinct. Richard looked round. Jane was kneeling, her face buried in her hands. Lady Brampton, pale but resolved, was ready to sacrifice the life she had spent for him. O'Water had resigned himself to the final act of a life of peril, sealed in his blood. The lovely Spaniard alone lost all her self-possession, tears streaming from her uplifted eyes, her arms twined round his knees. To fly, fly, was the only thought she could express. "I yield," said York. "Throw open the door." O'Water's horse had been led within the hut. He vaulted on his back. He placed the dagger in his belt. "That way," Lady Brampton cried. "It leads to the river's side below." A scream from Monina followed his swift departure. "He perishes! He betrays us!" cried O'Water. Richard galloped on, not across the field away from town, but right into danger, there whence the troop was certainly approaching. He was lost to view on the instant, in a straggling lane which stretched out half across the field. A moment after coming from the other side, unobserved, till in the hut Clifford entered alone. He bore a large bundle. His steps were cautious and swift. His look told that he was intent only on the object of his errand. "I have succeeded beyond my hope. My life on it all is safe. Where have ye hid the prince? Oh, prithee, fear not, nor trifle. Each second is precious." The confused, wondering looks of all present replied to him. Clifford laughed, a short, sarcastic, bitter laugh. Then, with a fiend-like expression of face, he said, "The prince has done well, and ye have all done well, and his grace will thank you anon. Ye grudge me, maybe, the Duchess Margaret's bounty. She promised largely. 'Twere pity to share the boon among so many. Now mark the event." These words displayed the baseness of his motive, yet vouched for his sincerity. He threw a menacing glance around, and then quitted the hut, and with hurried pace hastened across the field towards the town. End of chapter 51. Chapter 52 of The Fortunes of Perkin Warbeck by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Lauren Huff. Chapter 52. Treason. Full many a glorious morning have I seen flatter the mountain tops with sovereign eye, kissing with golden face the meadows green, gilding pale streams with heavenly alchemy, anon permit the basest clouds to ride with ugly wrack on his celestial face. Shakespeare. The Duke of York, urged so earnestly to fly, felt that to do so was to save himself at the expense of his friends, on whom Henry's vengeance would severely fall when he found himself balked of his victim. He consented to leave Jane Shore's abode with the resolve not of effecting his escape, but of securing, by surrendering himself, the safety of his defenseless adherents, united under her lowly roof. He directed his course as he believed into the very center of danger, entering the narrow straggling street whence the sound of the advance of the troop of horse had been heard. He entered the lane. It was empty. The ominous sounds were still sharp and near. It seemed as if they were in some street parallel to the one which he threaded. He turned at right angles into another, to reach the spot. Again he turned, led by the baffling noise, in another direction. It was just 4 a.m. There were but few abroad so early. He saw a monk gliding stealthily from under a dark archway, and a poor fellow who looked as if he had slept beneath heaven's roof, and had not wherewithal to break his fast. True to the kindly instincts of his nature, Richard felt at his girdle for his purse. It was long since he had possessed the smallest coin of his adversary's realm. I, a prince! His feeling had been more bitter, but that his fingers came in contact with his dagger's hilt, and the conviction of freedom burst with fresh delight upon him. Free, even in spite of its intents, for the tramp which had gradually grown fainter was dying absolutely away. They had probably reached the hut. Thither he must return. It was no easy thing to find his way to it. He had so entangled himself in the narrow lanes and wretched assemblages of dwellings huddled together on the outskirts of London. At length they opened before him. There was the dingy field, there the hut. Standing in quiet, beneath the rays of the morning sun, of the opening, summer, soft, sweet day. He was quickly at its threshold. He entered. Jane was within, alone, seated in her wooden chair, her hands clasped, her pale face sunk on her bosom. Big tears were gathering in her eyes and rolling down her faded cheeks unheeded. Jane's aspect was usually so marble, a miraculous chiseling of resigned hopelessness, her mien so unbending that these signs of emotion struck the prince with wonder and compassion. He knelt at her feet and pressed her thin but little hand to his lips, saying, "Mother, where are my friends? Mother, bless me before I go." She dried the drops raining from her eyes, saying in a voice that expressed how occupied she was by her own emotion, "I am a sinful woman. Well do these tones remind me of the same. Those days are quite gone, even from the memory of all. But once they were as the present hour, when so he spoke, and I was lost, and still am lost. For, through hunger and cold and shame, I love and cannot quite repent. Will the hour ever come when I can regret that once I was happy?" Many, many sad years had passed since words like these had dropped from poor Jane's lips. Her feelings fed on her, possessed her, but she had been mute. Overflowing now, her accent was calm. She spoke as if she were unaware that her thoughts framed speech, and that she had an auditor. "You have paid a dear penalty, and are surely forgiven," said York, striving in his compassion to find the words that might be balm to her. "Prince," she continued, "some time ago. I have lost all date. Now the chasm seems not, now a long eternity. It was when my poor heart knew nothing of love, save its strong necessity, and its delight. Methought I would see your father's fair offspring, for I loved them for his sake. At the festival of Easter I placed myself near the gate of the royal chapel. I thought to be unseen. The happy queen held her sons each by the hand. You were then, as now, his image, a little sportive blue-eyed cherub. The Prince of Wales had his mother's look, her large dark eye, her soft rosy mouth, her queen-like brow, her beauty which had won Edward, her chaste sweetness which had made her his wife. My presence, I thought to conceal it better, was revealed. The queen turned her face away. There was anguish surely written there, for the prince darted on me a look of such withering scorn. Yes, even he, his stainless fair brow was knit, his bright angel's face clouded. The look sank in my heart. Edward's beautiful, pure child reproved me, hated me. For 3 days I felt that I would never see the deluder more. You do not share his abhorrence. You do not hate the pale ghost of Shore's wife. Such clinging to the past, such living memory of what was so absolutely dead to all except herself, awestruck the prince. "We are all sinners in the eyes of God," he said. "But thy faults are surely forgiven thee, gentle one. Thy tears have washed every trace away, and my brother, my poor murdered Edward, now blesses thee. Alas, would that I could soften this last stage of your suffering earthly life." "'Tis better as it is," she answered hastily. "Once I felt disgrace and privation keenly. Perhaps that may atone. Now, would it were more bitter, that so I might wean myself from him whose very memory will lose my soul. You are good, and Our Lady will requite you. Now listen. The damsel Monina and Master O'Water have gone towards Southend. Your remaining friends watch for you here. I shall see them again tonight. Meanwhile, it is to be feared that Clifford plots vengeance, and you must fly. You must at every hazard go towards Southend. Beyond the town, on the lone sands, there is a wooden cross, telling where one escaped dreadful peril through the might of him who died on it for us. The smallest sign, the waving of your cap, will be watched for by the Adelaide. They will send a boat to take you on board. Now swiftly depart. Your life hangs on the hour. This purse will furnish you with means. Lady Brampton left it for you. Bless me, mother, ere I go. Can a sinner's blessing avail? Fear rather that God punish me through you, where my heart is garnered. Oh, may he indeed bless and save you, and I shall die in peace." He kissed her withered hand and was gone. She dragged her failing limbs to the casement. He was already lost among the straggling tenements that bounded her field. Again York was flying from his foe, again studying to elude pursuit, with how different feelings. Before, his flight was peremptory, for the preservation of others, while he blindly longed to deliver himself to slavery. Now liberty, for its own dear sake, was worth the world to him. He had tasted to its dregs the misery of captivity, and loathed the very name. Whatever might betide, he would never submit willingly again to 1 hour's thraldom. He felt his dagger's hilt. He drew it from the sheath and eyed its polished blade with gladness. For 8 months he had been living unarmed, under the perpetual keeping of armed jailers. What wonder that he looked on this sharp steel as the key to set him free from every ill. He got clear of the town. The open sky, the expanse of summer, adorned earth was before him. It was the leafy month of June. The far-spread cornfields were getting yellow, and on their weltering surface played the shadows of a few clouds, relics of the last night's storm. The sun was bright, the breeze balmy. Already the very footpaths were dry, and scarcely from its inmost leaves did any tree shake moisture. Yet there was a freshness in the scene, a lightness in the air, the gift of tempest. The dazzling sun rose higher, and each island vapor sank on the horizon. The garish light clothed all things. The lazy shadows crept up around the objects which occasioned them, while both object and its shade seemed to bask in the sunshine. Now overhead, the meeting boughs of trees scarce sufficed to shield him from the penetrating glare. Now in the open path he was wholly exposed to it, as his diminished shadow clung almost to the horse's hoofs. The birds twittered above. The lazy mare was stretched basking, while her colt gamboled around. Each slight thing spoke of the voluptuous indolence of summer, and the wafted scent of hay, or gummy exhalation of evergreens, distilled by the warm noon, fed with languid sweets every delighted sense. If paradise be ever of this world, it now embowered Richard. All was yet insecure. His white rose was far, but nature showered such ecstasy on him that his whole being was given up to her influence. Latterly the form of man had been ever before his aching sight under the aspect of an enemy, the absence of every fellow creature he hailed with gladness. Free and alone, alone and free. With the pertinacious dwelling on one idea, which is characteristic of overpowering feeling, this combination of words and ideas haunted his thoughts, fell from his lips, and made a part of the soul-subduing rapture now his portion. May it be added, we must address the unhappy and imaginative, who know that the future is so linked with the present as to have an influence over that present, when we add that the intensity of the liberated prince's feelings was wrought even to pain, by its being the last time that unalloyed delight would ever be his, the last when he might feel himself the nursling of nature, allied by the bond of enjoyment to all her offspring. He knew not this himself, immersed in the sense of all that he now possessed. He did not pause to reflect whether this were the last time that he, the victim of chance and change, might ever see the waving corn or shadowy trees, or hear the caroling birds, or the murmurs of the fresh, free brooks gurgling round some pendant bough or jutting stone. But that so it was to be gave poignancy to his pleasure, a dreamy halo to the whole scene. It would appear, in spite of the precautions taken by his enemy, that the north bank of the Thames had been neglected. Richard met with no impediment in his progress. Whenever he caught a sight of the river, he perceived unusual signs of activity. Little wherries shot hither and thither on its surface, revealing to him that keen and vigilant search was being made. Meanwhile he rode on, the broad stream for his guide, avoiding towns and villages. He ventured to purchase bread at a lone farmhouse. He alighted in a little grove beside a rivulet to rest his tired horse and to refresh himself. The summer heat recalled Andalusia to his mind, and scenes and objects quite forgotten wandered from their oblivious recesses back into his recollection. My happy boyhood, my beloved Spain, why did I leave the land of beauty, where with Monina? The idea of her whose fate was so inextricably linked with his, of his bride, who had quitted her palace home to share his adversity, reproached him. But his imagination could not fix itself on bleak Scotland, its wild haunts, its capricious king. It could only build another bower among the folds of the mountains of Andalusia, and place his white rose therein. Again he pursued his way. The slant beams of the descending sun were yet more sultry, but it sank swiftly down, now casting gigantic shadows, bathing the tree-tops in golden dew, and flooding the clouds with splendor. Now it was gone, and the landscape faded into a brown mellow tint. The bird's last chirp was given. The beetle winged her noisy flight. The congregated rooks had flown to the belfry of the church, or to their nests in the churchyard trees. Silence and twilight crept up from the sedgy banks of the river, leaving the pale water alone to reflect the struggling farewell of day. In a little time the banks shelved away, giving place to broad yellow sand. Richard ventured to bend his course along the beach. There was a bark upon the dim tide, whose progress he had watched since noon, whose flapping or full sails were the signs by which he foretold the prosperity of his destined voyage. Now, with swelling canvas, it walked swiftly over the water. He passed Southend. He perceived the tall, rough-hewn cross. 2 figures were seated at its foot. He hesitated, but quickly perceiving that one was a woman, he proceeded onwards. The stars were out. The very west was dim. In the offing there was a vessel whose build and tall, slender masts he thought he recognized. The broad expanse of calm ocean was there, whose waves broke in tiny riplets on the beach. He reached the cross. O'Water and Monina saw his approach. The Irishman welcomed him boisterously in his own language. Monina uttered a benediction in Spanish. The scene was solitary and secure. Every danger was past. There floated the caravel which ensured escape, and the stars alone witnessed their flight. Monina gave her white veil to O'Water, who contrived to elevate it on the cross. In a few moments the splash of oars was heard, and a dark speck floated towards them on the waves from the direction of the Adelaide. "They come. You are safe," murmured his lovely friend. "This hour repays for all." The boat was already on the beach. A seaman leaped on shore. "The White English Rose," he said. Such was the word agreed upon, and hailing it, Monina hurried to embark with her companions. The little boat was pushed from shore. O'Water gave vent to his delight in a shout that resembled a yell. Monina crept close to the Duke of York. That he was safe was a truth so dear, so new, that she forgot everything save her wish to assure herself again and again that so it was. At that moment of triumph, something like sadness invaded Richard. He had quitted the land for which his friends had bled, and he had suffered. Forever. He had left his Catherine there, where all was arrayed against him for his destruction. This was safety, but it was the overthrow of every childish dream, every youthful vision. It put the seal of ineffectual nothingness on his every manhood's act. while each, occupied by their peculiar reveries, were aware only that they were being borne onwards on the waves. A smaller boat shot athwart their bows, and a voice exclaimed in Spanish, "Desdichados, estáis allá?" "My father, we are betrayed!" Monina cried, and she threw her arms round Richard, as if by such frail guard to shelter him. Another, stronger grasp was upon his arm as he endeavoured to rise. A voice, husky from passion, yet still Clifford's voice, muttered, "The day is mine. You, she, all are mine." "Thou fell traitor! What ho! Defero to the rescue!" Already the mariner had thrown a grappling iron. Already the Adelaide was in motion towards them. Clifford strove to draw his sword. York was upon him in mortal struggle, his keen dagger, unsheathed, uplifted. The boat lurched. His arm descended, but half the force of the intended blow was lost, while both fell overboard. The crew rushed to the boat's side to loosen the grappling iron, which concluded its upset. Defero, who stood high on the bows of his own boat, had seized Monina. Now another larger skiff was seen approaching. "To your oars!" cried the Moor. They shot swiftly towards the Adelaide, and while the sea became alive with craft, they reached the little caravel, who, turning her canvas to the wind, dropped down the tide. End of chapter 52. Chapter 53 of The Fortunes of Perkin Warbeck by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Lauren Huff. Chapter 53. Death of Clifford. Your love and pity doth the impression fill, which vulgar scandal stamped upon my brow. For what care I who calls me well or ill? So you overscreen my bad, my good allow. Shakespeare. On the 4th day of her restraint, imprisonment it could hardly be called, Lady Catherine was brought up to Westminster. She was carried in a close litter, and no familiar face or accustomed attendant came near. Her anxiety, her anguish weighed intolerably upon her. Sleep had not visited her eyes. She lived in perpetual terror that each sound was freighted with fatal tidings. It was in vain that even reason bade her nourish hope. A stronger power than reason dwelt in her heart, turning all its yearnings to despair. As she approached the city, she thought each step must reveal the truth of what she was to suffer. Lo, the palace was entered, her habitual chamber. Silence and solitude alone manifested that some change was even now in its effect. She had no tear to spend upon her grief. Her changing color, her quickened respiration showed that every faculty was possessed by terror. 2 hours, each minute stretched to a long, long century. 2 hours passed, when a little scroll was delivered to her. It came from the Queen and contained these words: "My white rose, the tempest has passed, leaving, alas, devastation. We yet remain to each other. Come." These expressions spoke the worst to her fear-stricken mind. No subsequent agony might ever compare to the pang that made her very lifeblood pause in her failing heart at that moment. Had the present and the future become void for him, to whom she was wedded heart and soul? Wedded in youth, when our hopes stretch themselves not merely to today and tomorrow, but even to eternity. In this state of human woe, we do not describe the disheartening and carking sorrows of those who lag on life's highway, but the swift, poignant, intolerable agonies of the young, to whom the aspiration for happiness is a condition of being. The Queen had been accustomed to witness and admire Catherine's self-command and quiet fortitude. She was awestruck on beholding the devastation of the last 4 days, and the expression of wild horror on her soft features. With feminine instinct she read her heart. Her first words were, "Sweet love, he lives, and he will live. His life is spared, and we may still hope." Tears at last flowed from the mourner's eyes as she asked, "What then will be his fate? Shall I ever see him more?" How can we guess the hidden purposes of the king? By your enforced solitude you have escaped his scowling brow, his violence, his sarcasms. Again he smiles. "My gentle Kate, my sweet, courageous sufferer, hitherto we have played with the lion's fangs. They are unsheathed in anger now. Let us prepare. He will be here anon." The princess desired not to exhibit too humiliating a spectacle of misery to her cruel foe. She checked her weeping. She endeavored to forget the burning agony that tortured her beating heart. "Let him but live, let me but once more see him." And the unbidden tears flowed again. The king soon broke in upon them. His look was haughty even to insolence. An expression of vulgar triumph was in his eyes, that baffled the eager scanning gaze of the hapless princess. He said scoffingly, and was it in man's nature, or only in Henry's, to look on the sad but lovely countenance of his victim, and to mock her woe? We congratulate you, lady, on the return of the gentle Perkin to our good city of Westminster. Do not weep, he is in safe keeping now, very safe. It is no feathered shoe our Mercury wears this day." "Holy Virgin," cried Catherine, "your grace does not surely mean—" "Fear not, he lives," continued Henry, his scorn growing more bitter as he spoke. "He lives and shall live till the white rose acknowledge on what base stock she is grafted, or he twist the rope by some new sleight. Is Perkin's honoured dame satisfied?" "Oh, no, 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 some covert meaning you have, in pity for a woman, speak." The agony her countenance expressed was the mute echo of the frightful idea that convulsed her frame. "Oh, let me see him, you have tormented me too cruelly. Even if my worst fears prove true, he suffers not more than I. And can it be that the young limbs of my own loved Richard are put to torture?" Elizabeth grew ashy white. The king listened with a sarcastic smile, saying, "I had not thought of that. You are a silly girl to mention such things." "I do not believe you," exclaimed the princess. "Your looks belie your words. Let me but see him afar off. Let me catch a glimpse of my princely love. Is he in the Tower?" "Neither the Tower nor any royal palace detains your lord. He is taking the air, pleasantly I hope, in the high places of our town. To finish this war of words and your incredulity, will you visit your prince of plotters and behold him on whom the King of Scotland bestowed your virgin hand? See him! Oh, even in death to clasp his decaying limbs were better than this absence." An indefinable expression passed over Henry's countenance as he replied, "Be it as you wish. You must hasten, for in an hour the occasion will be past. It is but a few steps. You shall be attended." At last she was to see him. This assurance filled and satisfied her. There was no place in her heart for any other thought, sinister as were her torturer's looks. Her eyes grew bright, her cheek resumed its vermeil tint. Never had she looked more lovely. It was a dazzling beauty, one of those ineffable expressions which, unless language could express music, or painting image fire, it is in vain to attempt to describe. An irradiation of love passed over her countenance, her form. Something like it dwells in Raphael's Madonnas and Guido's Angel of Annunciation. Henry was awestruck, yet did not falter in his purpose. He let the bright angel go forth on her mission of good and love, to meet on her way a sight fiends might rejoice over. Human life and human nature are, alas, a dread, inexplicable web of suffering and of infliction. In Westminster, in sight of the abbey where his ancestors had been crowned kings, the spectacle, intended to be so opprobrious, was set forth. Henry, in his angry fear on his escape, in his exultation at his recapture, forgot the soft tyranny of Catherine's looks. Or rather, he despised himself for the obedience he had yielded to them, and in the true spirit of baseness, was glad to revenge on her the ill effects that had resulted to him through his involuntary enslavement. It was a triumph to him to disgrace the object of her care, for he was ill-read, his understanding affording him no key to the unknown language, in that illuminated page of the history of feminine excellence, which tells the delight she feels in exhausting her treasures of devoted love on the fallen, because they need it most. He believed that to present her husband to her, under the very infliction of ignominy, would turn her affection to cold disdain. He permitted her to go. Attended by some of the bodyguard and a gentleman usher, she hastened through the courts of the palace into the open square. There was assembled a crowd of common people, hushed to universal silence. At a distance from the center, some were talking aloud. And the name of Perkin was the burthen of their speech. But pity stilled those nearest to the spot, towards which, to the surprise and horror of all, she hastened. The crowd instinctively closed to bar her advance, and when forced to make way, in spite of the despotism of the times, the word shame burst from the lips of many, especially the women. She was agitated by the obstacles, by the numerous uncourtly eyes turned on her. Still she went on, and soon saw. She understood not what, a kind of wooden machine in which the lord of her heart sat. There had been a time when pride and royal majesty of soul had shed such grandeur over York, that when exposed as a show, he had excited reverence, not scoffing. Now he was evidently laboring under great physical suffering. His brow was streaked with mortal paleness, his cheeks were colorless, his fair hair fell in disordered ringlets round his youthful but wan countenance. He leaned his head against the side of the machine. His eyes were half shut. It was not shame, but suffering that weighed upon their lids, and diffused an air of languor and pain over his whole person. Catherine hastened towards him. She knelt on the unworthy earth at his side. She kissed his chained hands. "You are ill, my love. My ever dear Richard, what has happened? for you are very ill." Roused by such music from the lethargy that oppressed him, yet still overcome, he replied, "Yes, and I do believe that all will soon end, and that I am stricken to the death." She grew pale. She called him cruel, asking him how he could dream of leaving her, who was a part of him, alone in the desolate world. "Because," he answered with a faint smile, "the world is kind to all save me. No taint, dear love, attaches itself to your name. No ill will mark your fate, when you are no longer linked to such a thing as I. God has spoken, and told me that this earth is no dwelling for one who, from his cradle to his last shame, has been Fortune's stepchild and her despised toy. How often have I been dragged to the utmost verge of life? I have felt indignation, anger, despair. Now I am resigned. I feel the hand of the Mighty One on me, and I bow to it. In very truth I am subdued. I sleep away the weary hours, and death will end them all." With every expression of tenderness, Catherine endeavored to recall him to life and to herself. She spoke of another escape, which it would be her care to achieve, of the solitude, of the paradise of love they would enjoy together. "My poor girl," he replied, "teach your young heart to seek these blessings apart from me. I were the very wretch Tudor stigmatizes me, could I live under a memory like this. Forget me, my white rose. Paint with gaudier colors the sickly emblem of my fortunes. Forget that, duped by some strange forgery, you were wedded to Perkin Warbeck." In spite of himself, large drops gathered in his eyes, swelling the downcast lids, and then stealing down. Catherine kissed them from his cheek. 1,000 times more noble, royal, godlike, she called him. Had not the best and worthiest suffered ignominious punishment, even our blessed Lord himself? His own acknowledgment alone could disgrace him. He must recall the false words wrung from his agony. This last vile act of his enemy must awaken each sovereign on his throne to indignation. Each would see him in a mirror of what might befall themselves if fallen. James, her royal cousin, roused by her, should resent the stigma affixed to his kinsman. "For your own sake, sweet, do so. My soul dying within me is alive again with indignation, to think that your plighted wedded love is he who is exposed to contumely. But for that, methinks I would call myself by that wretched name I dared pronounce, so that the annals of the House of York escaped this stain. Yet even thus I seem more closely allied to them, for violent death, treachery, and ill have waited on each descendant of Mortimer. My grandfather bore a paper crown and shame upon his kingly brow." He was interrupted by the officer, who unclosed the instrument of disgrace. Richard, weak and failing, was assisted to rise. Catherine supported him as a young mother her feeble offspring. She twined her arms round him as his prop, and in spite of misery was enraptured once again to see, to hear, to touch him from whom she had been absent so long. "This is not well. It must not be. His Majesty will be much displeased," said the chief of the guard, witnessing the compassion her tender care inspired. "You must return to the palace, lady." "One little step," pleaded Catherine. "If I should never see him more, how should I curse your cruelty? I will not speak as I have thought I would to these good people, to tell them that they may well honor him a princess loves. Drag me not away yet. One more goodbye. Farewell, noble York, Kate's only love. We meet again. This parting is but mockery." She wept on his bosom. The sound of wailing arose in the crowd. The prince's eyes alone were dry. He whispered comfort to her. He promised to live, to battle his foe again for her sake. The words revived her, and she saw him depart with hope, with new joy kindled in her bosom. There had been another, the public gaze, till Catherine came to draw all eyes to a newer wonder. An emaciated, pale woman, in a garb of penury, who knelt, telling her beads, beside York's prison. Her face was hid, but her hands were thin and white to ghastliness. During the last scene she had sobbed to agony, and now, as the place cleared, went her way silently, with slow, feeble steps. Many marked her with surprise and curiosity. Few knew that she was the Jane Shore whose broken heart whispered misery, as she thought that she beheld King Edward's guilt in which she had shared, visited on his son. This cruel lesson of religion was a canker in her heart, and most true it was, as far as regarded her royal lover, that his light loves and careless playing with sacred ties had caused the blot of base birth to be affixed to his legitimate offspring, and so strewed the sad way that led them to untimely death. Henry, cruel as he was, had not the courage to encounter his insulted prisoner on her return. Catherine's feelings were wrought too high for any display of passion. Her anxiety was spent on how she could soothe York's wounded feelings and restore his health. It were vain to ask, she feared. Yet if the king would permit her to attend on him, under whatever restrictions they should be obeyed, and this while poor Elizabeth besought her pardon with tears, for being the wife of her insolent adversary. She, a proud Plantagenet, was more sorely stung than the White Rose by the indignity offered to her house, and she entreated her not to love her brother less because of this foul disgrace. So doing, said the quick-sighted queen, you fulfill his dearest wish. While you are Richard's loving wife, he, even he, the fallen and humiliated, is an object of envy to his majesty, who sought, by making you witness his ignominy, to detach you from him. How strange a mistake, replied Catherine, for one so sage as the king. The lower my sweet Richard falls, the more need he surely has of me. But that love, such as ours, knits us too indivisibly to admit a reciprocity of benefit. I should say that it is to make me rich indeed, to enable me to bestow, to lavish good on my lord. But we are one, and I but give to myself, and myself receive, if my weakness is of any strength to him. Dear sister mine, your liege, wise as he may be, is a tyro in our woman's lore, in the mysteries of devoted love. He never felt one inspiration of the mighty sprite. This was not quite true. For some few days Henry had been so inspired, but love, an exotic in his heart, degenerated from being a fair, fragrant flower into a wild, poisonous weed. Love, whose essence is the excess of sympathy, and consequently of self-abandonment and generosity, when it alights on an unworthy soil, appears there at first in all its native bloom, a very wonder even to the heart in which it has taken root. The cold, selfish, narrow-hearted Richmond was lulled to some slight forgetfulness of self when first he was fascinated by Catherine, and he decked himself with ill-assorted virtues to merit her approbation. This lasted but a brief interval. The uncongenial clime in which the new plant grew impregnated it with its own poison. Envy, arrogance, base desire to crush the fallen were his natural propensities, and when love refused to minister to these, it changed to something like hate in his bosom. It excited his desire to have power over her, if not for her good, then for her bane. The Duke of York was imprisoned in the Tower. No further measures were apparently in action against him. Catherine no longer hoped anything from her foe, and day and night there lay beneath her eyelids the image of Richard, wasting and dying in captivity. Something must be done, some aid afforded him. She was anxious also to learn the details of his flight, and how again he fell into the hands of his foe. Monina, who in 1,000 disguises had been used to penetrate everywhere, was seen no more. Still, public report informed her of many things. It was known that Sir Robert Clifford, the old spy and traitor of the White Rose, had become aware of the measures taken by York's adherents to ensure his escape from England. He had followed him down the river, and by a knowledge of the signs and countersigns of the party, decoyed him into a boat that was to convey his victim back to his prison house. The deceit was discovered, and a mortal struggle ensued on board the tiny bark. It sunk, and many perished, Clifford among the rest. On the morrow his body was found upon the beach, stiff and stark. A gaping wound in his neck showed that the waters alone had not been his foe. In his clenched hand he grasped a mass of golden hairs, severed by some sharp implement from the head to which they grew, as if naught else could liberate his enemy from his hold. There he lay, bold Robin Clifford, the dauntless, wily boy, hunted through life by his own fell passions, envy, cupidity, and libertinism. They had tracked him to his death. His falsehoods were now mute, his deceptions passed away. He could never more win by his smiles, or stab by his lying words. Death alone had a share in him, death and the cold sands beneath which he was interred, leaving a name, the mark of scorn, the symbol of treachery. They had struggled beneath the strangling waves, Richard and his adversary. The prince was wounded in the scuffle, and became enfeebled almost to insensibility before he could sever from his enemy's grasp the fair locks he clutched. He swam away as well as he might, and with the instinct of self-preservation made for the shore. He forgot that England was a wide prison. He only strove to master the fate which beat him to the ground. He reached the sands. He sought the covert of some near underwood, and threw himself upon the earth in blind thankfulness. Exhausted, almost inanimate, he lay there, given up only to the sense of repose, and safety from death, which visited his failing heart with a strange sense of pleasure. The following morning was far advanced before he could rouse himself from this lethargy. He looked upon the waters, but the Adelaide was no more to be seen. He was quite alone. He needed succor, and none was afforded him. Well he knew that every field, lane, dingle, and copse swarmed with enemies, and he shuddered at the likelihood that, unarmed and weak as he was, he should fall into their hands. He desired to reach London again as his sole refuge, and he journeyed, as he hoped, towards it, all unknowing of the route. No way-worn traveller in savage lands, pursued by barbarous enemies, ever suffered more than the offspring of Edward IV, amidst the alienated fields of his paternal kingdom. Cold and rain succeeded to the pleasant summer weather. During night he lay exposed to the tempests. During day he toiled on, his limbs benumbed, his heart wasted by hunger and fatigue. Yet never, at the head of the Scottish chivalry, never in Burgundy or in England, did he feel more resolute not to submit, but baffling fortune and his enemy's power, to save himself in spite of fate. He had wandered far inland, and knew not where he was. He had indeed passed beyond London, and got up as high as Barnes. It was the 4th day from that of his escape. He had tasted little food, and no strength remained in him, except that which gave energy to his purpose. He found himself on a wide, heathy common, studded with trees, or desolately open. The rainy day closed, and a bleak east wind swept over the plain, and curled the leaden-colored waters of the river. His love of life, his determination not to yield, quailed before the physical miseries of his lot. For some few moments he thought that he would lie down and die. At this time another human figure appeared upon the scene, a Benedictine lay-brother, who, in the freedom of solitude, in defiance of wind and rain, trolled a ditty, fitter for a ruffling swaggerer's bonnet than a monk's cowl. He started not a little on perceiving our wanderer leaning against the scathed trunk of a solitary tree, nor less did he wonder when he recognized the fallen prince. It was Heron himself, the magnanimous mercer, who, having effected his escape with a well-hoarded purse, contrived to introduce himself into the house of Bethlem at Sheen, which was called the Priory. He was a little frightened to perceive his ancient leader, but pity succeeded to fear, and with many fair words and persuasions he induced him to permit himself to be conducted to the Priory. There, since he believed himself to be dying, he might receive the last sacraments. There, perhaps, for some few minutes, he might again behold his Catherine. Thus was the fugitive again led within the pale of his enemy's power. The prior, a man esteemed for holiness, did not delay to make his sovereign acquainted with the capture of his rival. His awe of Catherine having vanished, Henry was left at liberty to follow the ungenerous dictates of his groveling spirit. Many a courtier, true man or false, counselled the death of the aspiring youth, and they praised their master's magnanimity when he rejected this advice, and in lieu exposed him, whom he knew to be the descendant of a line of kings, to beggarly disgrace. Thus, worn and weak, the ill-fated son of York was made a public spectacle of infamy. But Henry went a step too far, and when he thrust the Scottish princess forward on the scene, he turned defeat into triumph. He was not to die, but rather to pine out a miserable existence. Or had the sage monarch any other scheme? The high-spirited prince was to be cooped up within the Tower, there where the Earl of Warwick wasted his wretched life. Did he imagine that the resolved and ardent soul of Richard would, on its revival, communicate a part of its energy to the son of Clarence, and that ere long they would be enveloped in one ruin? Some words had transpired that appeared to reveal such an intention, and his order to the lieutenant of the Tower that, without permitting, he should connive at any covert intercourse between the two, his recommendation of a noted spy and hireling to a high trust, and the order this fellow had to bring each day intelligence to the palace, from the prison, spoke loudly of some design, for Henry never did aught in vain. It was in circulation also among the lower officers in the fortress that an attempt to escape was expected on the part of the prisoners, and that rich reward would attend its discovery. End of chapter 53. Chapter 54 of The Fortunes of Perkin Warbeck by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Lauren Huff. Chapter 54. Imprisonment in the Tower. And bare at once, captivity displayed, stands scoffing through the never-opened gate, which nothing through its bars admits save day and tasteless food. Byron. The Lady Catherine, no longer trusting the good intentions of the insolent tyrant, was eager to communicate with her royal cousin of Scotland, to urge him to save from death or disgrace, if not to effect the liberation of him to whom he had given her hand. The difficulty of finding a messenger was great. The Queen, all amiable and sorrowing as she was, shrunk from any act which, if discovered, would enrage the king. Where did Monina tarry while her friend was in this strait? Of all his sometime associates, was there not one who would risk all to retard the last steps of fate? Since York's escape, she had been so vigilantly guarded that 1,000 schemes she had formed for her own evasion proved abortive at their very outset. Help was at length afforded her unexpectedly when most despairing. Edmund Plantagenet stood before her, changed indeed from what he had been. She had not seen him since the siege of Exeter, where he was wounded, but slight was his bodily hurt in comparison to the death blow his mind received. Plantagenet was one of those concentrated characters whose very outward show of softness and gentleness serves the more to force the texture of their souls to receive one indelible impression. He had passed a boyhood of visions, given up to mighty aspirations and engrossing reverie. His thoughts were stirring as the acts of others. His forest school had so tutored him that he could live in bodily repose while his mind ruminated. He could be quickened to hope and fear, to lofty ambition, to generosity and devoted courage, feeling in his heart the keenest impulses, while around him were the mute trees of the wild wood and pathless glades. He could be satisfied with such dreamy illusions, so that action with him was never the result of physical restlessness, nor of youthful emulation, nor of that stirring spirit of life which forces us to abhor repose. It flowed from an imperious sense of duty. It welled up from the very sources of his soul. Other men perform the various parts allotted to them, and yet are something else the while, as is the actor, even while he struts in the garb of royalty. But Edmund yielded himself wholly up, and was the mere creature of the thought within. To be great and good, great from the good he should effect, was his boyhood's aspiration. It is probable that if he had not been subjected to extraneous influence, he would have devoted himself to religion and become a saint or martyr, for his all, his understanding, heart, and person, would have been given up to the holy cause he espoused. His being led to King Richard's tent the night before the Battle of Bosworth Field gave a new and inextinguishable law to his life. Unknown duties were imposed. The first and dearest was to redeem his father's soul from the guilt of murderous ambition by elevating his injured nephew to his original greatness. He devoted himself to his cousin. Soon he learned to love Richard as the work of his own hands. He had reared his tender infancy. He had been his tutor in martial exercises, teaching him to curb the fiery steed, to wield the lance, and more than all, to meet danger in the field fearlessly, to be honorable, brave, and kind. He had led him to war, and shielded him with his own body from the cruel Moor. If ever they were divided, his thoughts dwelt only the more carefully with him. Last, he had brought him from glorious combats in Spain to conquer his ancestral kingdom, and set him up the rival of a powerful king, the mark of his vengeance. It was all over. Edmund possessed no innate strength to rise from the blow. He was a mariner on the wide ocean, without compass or rudder. The universe had one central point for him. That was destroyed, and a total blank remained. York's first surrender visited him as a death stroke. He struggled against it, enfeebled by his wound, more by despair. He passed over to Ireland. There he expected to find friends of the White Rose. He found only enemies of Duke Perkin, men eager to exculpate themselves from the charges of ill faith or ingratitude, gladly adopted a phraseology or a belief that reduced to dust the golden glories of poor Edmund's idol. Perkin Warbeck, O thou flower of York, thou nursling of love, thou child of calamity, is even thy bright name so to be tainted? Not by those immediately arrayed by self-interest against thee, but by the vulgar crew ever eager to crush the fallen. There was no hope in Ireland. Keating, the prior of Kilmainham, was dead. The Earl of Desmond was reconciled to the English government. Lord Barry had fled to Spain. The citizens of Cork were busy redeeming by eager servility their mayor's disloyalty. Overcome by these sad changes, a malignant fever seized on Edmund. In addition to every other disappointment, he had the consciousness that his aid was necessary to his cousin, that his absence was probably misinterpreted by his friends as cowardly dereliction. York was calling on him in vain. Monina perhaps suspected his truth. Next to the son of his life, the noble Richard, Monina lay nearest to his heart. It was a mixture of many feelings, and even love, subdued by hopelessness, quickened them to greater intensity. As soon as he could rise from his couch, he directed his course to England. He arrived in London on the day of the Duke of York's worst disgrace. It was reported to him as the gossip of the town. At the fatal word, a mortal change seized upon his frame. His limbs were as if struck by palsy. His cheeks fell in. His hair grew white. On his arrival he had taken up his abode in a monastery in the habit of a poor pilgrim. The sage monks who beheld his state possessed no leechcraft to administer his cure. He lay with beating pulses and open eyes, while the work of the grave appeared already in operation against him. He wasted into a fleshless skeleton. And then another secret change came over him. He conquered death, and crawled forth, the ghost of what he was, into the hopeless world. He contrived to gain admission to the princess. She did not recognize him. Such was the pale disguise disease had put upon him. His voice, hollow as from a tomb, was altered. His dark, melancholy eyes, occupying too large a portion of his face, gleamed from under his streaked and wan brow. Yet his was a visit of comfort, for he could do her mission to Scotland and invite the forgetful James to succor his friend and kinsman. Edmund listened eagerly to this proposal. A draught of soothing balm descended into his frame, with the thought that yet all was not lost. His physical energy almost returned. He hurried to depart. "How will you traverse this wide kingdom?" asked the lady. "Cannot the Adelaide come as before, to aid and speed you on your way?" "The Adelaide is sailing on the far ocean sea," replied Plantagenet. "We are all as dead, in the eyes of Defero and our Monina." "Faithless girl!" With a trace of his ancient warmth and sweetness, Edmund entered upon the gentle maiden's exculpation. He related that a poor fellow lay on the bed next to his in the convent hospital, whom he recognized to be an Irishman who had escaped from Waterford, and sailed with them in the Adelaide to Cornwall. From him he heard the tale of what had befallen Defero and his child. He heard how the mariner had long haunted the English coast, waiting for an opportunity to carry off the prince. Of the fatal night, when snatching his daughter from the watery peril, he saw Richard, as he believed, perish in the waves. What more had the Moorish mariner and his daughter to do with this miserable, guilty island? He called his men together. He told them his resolve, finally, to quit the eastern world for the golden islands of the west, inviting those who were averse to the voyage to go on shore at once, before the fair wind that was rising should hurry them into the open sea. The poor Irishman alone desired to land. Before he went, he saw the Spanish damsel. He described her as calm and mild, though there was something unearthly in her gleaming eyes and in the solemn tone of her voice. "If," she said, "you meet any of our friends, any who ask for Defero and his daughter, if you see Lady Brampton, Lord Barry, or Sir Edmund Plantagenet, tell them that Monina lives, that she tarries with her father, and tasks herself to be his comfort and support. We seek the Western Indies. Well may it betide us that we never reach the unknown strand, or we may be cast away in an uninhabited solitude, where my care and companionship may stead my dear father much. Or I may teach the sacred truths of our religion to the wild Indians, and speak the dear name of Christ to the unbaptized of those wilds. Or soften, as best I may, the cruel Spaniard, and save the devoted people from their barbarity. Tell them, whichever way I look, I perceive 1,000 duties to which our great taskmaster calls me, and these I live to fulfill, if so my feeble body will permit. Tell them that my only hope is death, that, and that by my obedience to the Almighty will, I may partly merit to join in paradise the earthly angel who now survives there." Tears choked further speech. She imprinted her words by a gift of gold. The boat which had been hailed came alongside. The man on board, the sails of the Adelaide swelled proudly in the gale. The little caravel ran lightly along the top of the roughening waters. In less than 2 hours she was out of sight, speeding swiftly over the sea towards the wild western ocean. Plantagenet departed, and the princess was yet more cheered when she found that no further injury was meditated against her lord. Imprisonment in the Tower was his sole punishment. Her pure, gentle mind could not divine the full extent of King Henry's villainy, nor guess how he undermined the edifice he claimed praise for not leveling with the ground. Nor could her resigned, patient, feminine spirit conceive the cruel, biting impatience of his lot that York endured. He had yielded at first to the overwhelming sense of disgrace, and felt that last, worst emotion of the injured, which answers to the internal question, "What have I done so to be visited?" In the poet's words, "I cannot charge my memory with much save sorrow, but I have been so beyond the common lot, chastened and visited, I needs must think that I was wicked." But soon his eager, eagle spirit spurned the tame, debasing thought. He resolved again to struggle, and at last to conquer. The fire burned brighter for its short smoldering. Almost with a light heart he laughed, as he resolved again to endeavor. His prison life was more than irksome, it was unendurable. No change, which is the soul of enjoyment, varied it. No sympathy, the parent of content, came anear. In his young days he had trod on the verge of life's wave, watching it recede. and fancying that it would discover glittering treasures as it retreated into the ocean of eternity. Now the tide ebbed sullenly, the barren sands grew dark, and the expanse before afforded no hope. What was to be done? He was in the tower, whence he had twice escaped, where the Earl of Warwick was immured, pining in fruitless vegetation, rather than living. Should he do as he had done and become a cipher, a forgotten prisoner, a mere thing to wake and sleep and be as nothing? The very dog that guards a cottage door from nightly harm had more dignity and purpose in his life than this victim of ambition. The bird that alighted on the sill of his iron-barred casement and carried off a crumb for her nestlings was an emblem of utility and freedom in comparison, which Warwick, cut off from all, must weep to mark. How different was Richard's fate! He had dear friends ready to risk all for him, whose life's sacrifice he could repay only by being true to himself. He had a wife, wedded to him in youth's early flower, whose happiness was unalterably linked to his. He had courage, fortitude, energy. He would not cast these gifts away, a thankless boon. He valued them at their price. If death crowned his efforts, it were well. He was a mere toy in the hands of God, and he submitted. But as a man he was ready to cope with men, and though defeated, never to be vanquished. Not a month after his removal to the Tower he had observed his facilities, marked his instruments, and resolved to enter on his schemes. They were quickened by other circumstances. Warwick heard of his cousin's arrival, and he believed this to be the signal of his own deliverance. His first chief desire was to have communication with him. Among his attendants there was one to whom he could apply. He was a lank, tall fellow, with little understanding and but one idea, gratitude to the Duke of Clarence. This man, called Roger, and nicknamed Long Roger, his length being his chief distinction, had been very poor, and burthened besides with several infant children. Accidents and a bad season brought them to the verge of starvation when a chance threw him in the way of the Duke of Clarence, who got him made servitor in the Tower. When this unfortunate prince was imprisoned within its fatal walls, Long Roger underwent 1,000 perils to wait on him by stealth, and to do what service he might. Long Roger had a prodigious appetite, and his chief delight was to smuggle dainties, cooked by his Madge, into the prison chamber of the Duke. The manner of Clarence's death, which Roger affirmed to accord with the popular tradition, alone consoled the faithful, sympathizing fellow. Now he had turned the key for 13 years on the Duke's hapless son. In spite of his watchful care and proffered cates, he had seen the poor youth dwindle to a skeleton, when suddenly the progress of delay was checked by Our Lady. It was a miracle to see Lord Edward grow fat and comely to look upon, changing his woebegone looks into gracious smiles. By the mass, there was witchcraft in it. Warwick often thanked Long Roger and told him what he would do when restored to freedom and rank, which will never be, Roger said, except among the saints in paradise, unless it pleased God to remove his majesty, when my lady the Queen should fully know how fervently her cousin prayed for her, and forsooth, with sweet Prince Arthur, his royal mother would be all-powerful. Long Roger's visions went not beyond. He never imagined the possibility of effecting the Earl's escape. His limited understanding suggested no relief save a bottle of canary or bunches of white roses in June, which in fact was Dame Madge's feminine idea, and often had the simple flowers soothed Warwick's care. To this man the poor prisoner applied to enable him to see and converse with the newly arrived Richard. 2 are better than 1 to a feast, and the next time Roger meditated a dainty supper for his lord, he resolved to endeavour that York should partake it with him as a guest. In his own guileless way, the simple-hearted man began to practice on and bribe one of his fellows, without whom it had been difficult to accomplish his desire. Abel Blewett had lately been appointed to his service. He was nearly a dwarf, with bushy eyebrows and red hair. There was something of ill omen in his physiognomy, but as the tall yeoman looked over the head of his comrade, his courage rose. The whipper-snapper could not rebuff me, he thought, as he drew himself up to his full height, and began to propound the mighty deed of conducting Perkin by mistake to the Lord Edward's chamber on his return from vespers. Roger paused suddenly, for in spite of his stature he was appalled by the glance Blewett shot up from under his penthouses of brows. Still, he gave a willing assent, and even took upon himself the chief risk of the undertaking. The following evening, while Richard was yet pondering how to commence his machinations, undecided though resolved, and while he made up his mind not to betray his thoughts to the sinister-looking being before him, he was surprised to find that he was led through an unaccustomed gallery, and still more on entering the chamber into which he was introduced, to recognize it as that where he had unexpectedly found refuge during his last visit to the Tower, and to perceive that Warwick himself was there expecting him. Was this the thin, wasted being he had seen 3 years before? Had Warwick then been set free to hunt upon the hills, he had not regained more flesh and bloom than now that hope had been his only medicine. His cousin York had inspired him with marvelous confidence. His last entrance into the formidable tower, and his speedy exit, had appeared a miracle to the poor earl, to whom these high walls and sad chambers formed a world from which, as from the larger one, death only promised egress. He had pined and wasted in his appetite to be free, to be without those gates, beyond that fosse and giant battlements that girded him in. These portentous, insuperable obstacles were mere cobweb chains to Richard. He had come in, he had departed, and all as easily, so Warwick thought, as the unregarded fly, that had perhaps flown from Westminster, from Elizabeth's chamber, to light upon his cheek. In all the subsequent tales of York's checks and overthrow, he smiled at the idea that one born to victory could be thus overcome. He laughed at the chains Henry had thrown over him, and his transfer to the Tower elated him with a firm belief that liberty was at hand. Dwelling on these thoughts, Warwick ceased to be the dead alive. He was cheerful, erect, elastic in his gait. His complexion glowed with health, while sickness lingered still on the cheek of the younger Plantagenet, and a more subdued spirit dwelt in his heart. Long Roger beheld the cousin's embrace. He heard the earl call him, named Perkin, his liege, and most dear kinsman. From that moment the opprobrious name was banished from Roger's lips. He was convinced of York's truth, and the Lord Edward's friend became an object of reverence and of love. End of chapter 54. Chapter 55 of The Fortunes of Perkin Warbeck by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Lauren Huff. Chapter 55. Attempt to Escape. Gentle cousin, if you be seen, you perish instantly for breaking prison. No, no, cousin, I will no more be hidden, nor put off this great adventure to a second trial. Two noble kinsmen. Quick on the first greeting followed Warwick's question. And, noble cousin, what have you projected? When shall we escape? Richard's being in durance with him seemed sufficient pledge that without delay they should both be free, while York, wearied by opposition to his mighty foe, just foiled in his endeavors to preserve his freedom, even when he had attained it, saw giant obstacles in his path, and although resolved to endeavor all, was fully conscious of the fatal end that must wait upon his too probable failure. His reply was dictated by these feelings. He was averse to drag one so inexperienced and so unhappy into the pit he believed that he was digging for himself. He besought the earl well to weigh the value he set upon life, to place the fatal scaffold in prospect, to teach himself to know what death was, and to be ready to meet it before he planned escape from the wily tutor. Warwick listened with impatient wonder, but when Richard concluded with affirming that he himself, in sober sadness, preferred hazarding all to the remaining in prison, and that he would be free, the earl's countenance again grew light and gladsome. But when, coz, when? Was still his eager question. Thus they had changed characters. Warwick, so many years secluded from the world, was in total ignorance of its ways. Had the tower gates been opened to him, he had trembled to walk forth alone, but restraint had made him feminine, and with his cousin he would have rushed upon an army of spears, in sure belief that some unseen aegis would protect him. His position rendered him timid, indolent, and dependent, but he relied on Richard as a woman on her lover. York beheld all things in their clear, true light. He was aware of every difficulty, of the means he possessed for overcoming them, and of the hazards he ran in using these means. A sentiment, born of the highest generosity, made him hesitate before he concerted any plan with Warwick. It was not alone that he was averse to risking another life, but he felt that his cause would receive advantage from this link with an undoubted Plantagenet, nay, that in the prison itself the attachment and respect felt towards the son of Clarence, by some of the very men he meant to use, would serve him. That he should reap benefit from exposing the ill-fated prince to untried dangers revolted his high and independent nature. Warwick had recourse to many an entreaty and persuasion ere he brought Richard to consent that their fortunes should be joined, and that, last of the White Rose, they would rise or fall together. Still, York was obliged to check his cousin's impatience, and to show that they must slowly work out the end they had in view. To gratify the earl's greedy curiosity, York related his adventures. They afforded him an inexhaustible fund of surprise and delight. He sighed over his tale of wedded happiness, and half wondered that angelic woman, seated high on the throne of loveliness and love, should deign to devote herself for man. A pang, not of envy, but of regret on comparing their fates, shot across him. Soon the usual current of feeling returned, and when he heard that his idolized, lost Elizabeth was the friend and companion of the devoted wife of York, his affection for Richard was increased. Night was far advanced before they separated, and then only in certain expectation of meeting again. York's hopes grew brighter, and he indulged in visions of the future, which lately had been so blank. He verily believed that he might escape, though still he doubted whether he should. He remembered the fondness of the Duchess of Burgundy for her brother Clarence, and how she had deplored the hard destiny of his offspring. He would present that son, liberated by him, to her. His junction with the prince must revive the old Yorkists in his favor. This worst blast of fortune might be the gale to speed him to the harbor of his hopes. The royal cousins met again and again, nor was it long before their own desires and Henry's craft began to weave that fatal web which entangled them even in the very mode the hard-hearted king devised. Summer was gone, quicker than he was wont, and the sun withdrew his embattled array of light and heat, and cold and tempest, erewhile driven to mountain fastnesses, or to their own frozen kingdoms in the north, took courage and force, and broke with wild fury upon the defenseless world. The bleak winds were their coursers. Savagely they yelled and howled over the land they desolated. First, the growth of flowers was their prey, the fruits and then the verdure of the earth, while the sun, each day retreating, afforded further scope to their inroads. York resolved not to pass another winter in prison. He had quickly perceived that his purpose could only be effected by corrupting their guards, and then all would depend upon the fidelity of these men. His first attempts were followed by an almost too easy success. Good-hearted, dull-headed Long Roger heard with unreplying credulity the assertions of Warwick that Richard must succeed in all he undertook, and readily promised his aid. Abel Blewett, in spite of his dogged, sinister aspects, yielded at once to the seduction of a promised bribe. 2 others, by his advice, were associated as necessary to their success. Strangeways, a ruffling, drunken fellow who had been thrice dismissed, but whose pretty wife each time procured his reappointment, and Astwood, a saving miser, who lent money to his fellow servitors on usury. With these instruments the cousins went to work. Warwick in full belief of success, York perceiving treason and discovery close to them, but ready to defy these bloodhounds to their worst. "And now, coz," said Warwick, "in very truth there needs no further delay. Methinks were the drawbridge down, you would mistrust some gin, and wait to throw an arch of your own across the moat. Sooth, my lord, I am aweary of your sloth." There was a caressing sweetness in Warwick's voice and manner, an ignorant, indolent, confiding enthusiasm, so unlike quick-witted Clifford or any of Duke Richard's former friends, that he felt a new emotion towards him. Hitherto he had been the protected, served, and waited on of his associates. Now he played the protector and the guardian. "My gentle cousin," he replied, "even as you trust, so you shall find me. Wait but a little, and all will be past. Yet I grieve to say, where you see escape, I perceive an ambushment of death, and though ready to face the grim skeleton, we must arm ourselves against him. I wish I could show you, even as I see, the dangers that environ us. Perhaps you would shrink, and it is yet time. What do you do? Not only plan escape, but ally yourself, and give the sanction of your untarnished name to one whom Tudor brands as an impostor and abhors as a rival. His vengeance will fall heavily for this deed, if he reach you, while a few years, like the many already gone by, may lead him to his grave, and you to liberty. I have too often met danger to be frightened by him, and I endure worse than death each day I pass of youth apart from my sweet white rose. You have no lady love to beckon you across the path of peril. Bethink you well, my ever-dear lord, will you not regret this prison when the cruel axe glitters before your eyes?" "Do you refuse, then, to take me with you?" said Warwick mournfully. "Be the choice yours. To go with me is fraught with danger. To stay—" "Hush, cousin," cried the Earl eagerly. "Speak not the ill-omened word. Stay, to endure days and nights of guarded doors, to eat viands served up poisoned by the jailer's touch, to see the sky but through those iron bars. Alas, in my dreams when heaven and its stars are before me, they are crossed and paled by those accursed lines. Give me but an hour to tread earth a free man. Or, mark, cousin, Sometimes I win good Roger to lead me to the roof of the White Tower. It is high, and overhangs the deep, dangerous river. The day you quit my side, I seek that tower, I leap from its height, and the cold waters shall drink up my being rather than I endure another hour of prison life." "My dear, dear cousin," said York, "it is written by the fates, and I yield. Our fortunes shall be one. A few days now brings the hour. It will move along the dial. It will become a portion of past time. What it will leave us is in the hands of God." That hour came. Full soon it came. The evening hour which preceded their escape. Long Roger served supper to the kinsmen, the last they were to partake within the fated walls. The poor fellow heaved a bitter sigh as he waited by his lord's chair. "Thou art downcast, good Roger," said the earl. "Pledge me, my man, in this ruby wine of Burgundy. Think of tomorrow, not of tonight. Tomorrow the deed will be done." Roger quaffed the proffered bowl. He set it down with another sigh, almost a groan, adding, "Better drown reason than life in the vat." Then, recollecting to what he alluded, and before whom, he blushed scarlet to his very ears, and like a bashful man he made it worse by going on blunderingly. "I was never handy at these sort of things. It is for all the world like turning out of a warm bed on a cold snowy morning, only to think of them, and when they are about, by the cross, I thought no hole far enough or dark enough, when my lord your father—" "Roger," exclaimed Warwick. The wine had not decreased the man's terror, but it had opened his mouth, and taken away his discretion. He continued, "It was an awful night. We all knew what was going to be done. I am sure, as Thomas Paulet said, we heard our very hearts beat. Then there was grim-faced Hobbler, who at the judgment might be taken for the born twin of Master Abel, only he was taller by a span. Even he looked uglier, nor spoke above his breath. 'Is he at prayers?' asked he, and Sir Brakenberry was white as the earth itself. It was the beginning of Lent, and the snow lay 3 feet deep on it. By no uncommon law of our nature, the dread design of the present night awoke keen recollection in the usually drowsy mind of this man. At first, with thrilling horror, Warwick interrupted him, but now the very terrors of the theme he chose assumed an awful charm. He was fascinated to listen, while his knees knocked together. Richard felt also the magic of such perilous excitement. "O Lord Edward," continued Roger, "these walls have seen fiendly sights. The blood of many a Plantagenet, York, or Lancaster is on its pavement. Was it not in this room that the pious King St. Henry, as Father Piers calls him? You will not sleep another night in it, so there is no harm now telling you that this poor ghost has been seen on the battlements coming from his very chamber where he was murdered. The night wind rushed round the massy walls, the autumnal wind, fierce and howling." York started up. "No more of this unreason, while we need all our strength, and God's grace to boot, to nerve us to our task. O, ghost of Lancaster, if indeed thou hauntest this spot, where those akin to me did the foul deed, be thy pious soul propitiated now. Many a mass shall be told for thy repose." Roger crossed himself and said an Ave. Then in his usual voice he rejoined, "Would the thing did not require blood. Master Abel vows by the saints, 'twere better when men make bad oaths to swear by the fiends, that Sir John must die. Old wrinkled Astwood squeaks out, by Our Lady, it were not worth while, with only promises for reward if we have not the rifling of the lieutenant's private chamber. They are bloody-minded men, my lord. Matt Strangeways, when he is sober, and I, fasting or feasting, hold out that we might bind him and get the keys. Blockhead, says Master Blewett, saving your presence, thou goest the way to hang us all." Another goblet had set Roger talking. Warwick had quitted the table. He threw open the casement. It was very dark, and the wind howled fearfully. "Oh, iron bars of my prison house," cried the ill-fated prince, "can only midnight murder wrench ye asunder? It is a dread act to disobey God's word and lay the soul under mortal sin. Must it be done?" "My dear cousin," said York, "do not mistake. A month ago the choice was yours. Now there is no going back. We have no right to draw these poor men into peril and then to quarrel at the precaution they take for their safeties. We said aye when the matter was proposed. Again, I repeat the word, they must look to it. Who so savagely have driven us to the fatal pass? When Digby undertook the gentle task of jailer, he knew that he must hold it at the hazard of his life." "Sir John has ever been kind to me," said Warwick. "Forgive the word, my lord. I am firm now. Away with mercy. To win an easy egress from these murderous walls, I could myself plant the dagger." "We are not executioners," interrupted the Duke, who felt none of Warwick's vacillations, now sinking beneath the required tone, now wound up far above it, and was perfectly calm, though his heart, he scarce knew why, entertained no hope of success. Warwick believed that he should win, and mourned the losers in the frightful game. Richard knew that he might fail, and assuredly would, did he not meet each necessity and hazard with a dauntless spirit. The sound of a bell from a neighboring convent was brought fitfully by the wind. "They are ringing matins. There is our signal," cried Roger. "And Digby's knell." The door of the chamber opened as Warwick said these words, and Blewett, with his usual cat-like pace, slid in. He walked straight up to Roger, and casting on him a glance from under his brows, said only, "Come." "Are all at rest?" asked the Earl. 2 hours agone," said Master Abel. "I have kept myself awake sharpening my steel." He touched the handle of a huge butcher's knife stuck in his girdle, whose glittering blade did credit to his care. Warwick turned pale and sick. "It will be dulled anon," continued Blewett. "Where are thy comrades?" Richard asked. "They wait at the end of the corridor. Master Astwood is counting his gains. Come, Long Roger." Poor Roger followed him to the door, then turning to the princes, "My royal masters," said he, "if this deed goes ill, and I never see ye more, by Christ and his cross, I pray a blessing on ye, if I may pray, but by the mass I fear I shall never pray, nor sup more." They were gone. Warwick strove to look, to be firm, but he grew ashy white. A door clapped to at a distance made him almost faint. Richard was pale also, but his hand shook not in the least as he presented a cup of wine to his cousin. "Give me water, rather," said the Earl, shuddering. "That cup is red. Hark, it is his groans." "It is the wind around the turret, where my liege and brother died," said York, endeavouring to give other thoughts to the poor prince, who cried, "It is the hell-born laugh of fiends viewing the deed." With the breeze, indeed, came a sound of laughter. "Are we betrayed?" cried York. But the sound passed away in wailing. Warwick was on his knees. "I cannot pray," he cried. "A sea of blood is before me." "Hush." Steps now approached along the corridor, and Blewett, his stained, half-wiped knife in his hand, appeared. Again the monosyllable "come" was pronounced, fraught with how different a meaning. A life had been torn from an innocent breast since then by that fell instrument. The princes, awestruck, one trembling with dread, the other striving to quell his horror for a murderer, followed him, as he led through the gallery. At the end stood Astwood with a bunch of keys. There were no stains on his hands. He looked anxious, but brightened up when he saw the prisoners. They trod stealthily along. Warwick's faltering steps scarce kept pace with their conductors. After passing through many narrow, high passages, they reached a low postern door. Astwood put the key in the lock. The sound was magical to the fearful Earl. "Farewell, old frightful walls," he cried. "Farewell, dark murderous prison house. The foul fiend possesses thee. Such is my benison." Blewett looked at him. York marked the sarcasm, the scorn of his glance. The gate meanwhile was opened. At that moment a clash of arms was heard. "The sentinels at the eastern gate," remarked Abel. "God grant it," cried Warwick. "God grant. Yet can it be? And am I free?" He rushed through the open door, intent to seize upon liberty as Tantalus on his forbidden feast. His first step beyond the threshold of his prison was followed by a shriek, almost a woman's shriek, it was so shrill and piercing. What he quailed before gave presence of mind to York, experienced in ills. Whatever the new evil might be, he went out to meet it calmly. A party of archers and yeomen were drawn up in the courtyard. "This truly is a mime," he said, "in which one at least wins. Our good lieutenant is safe. We are lost." Grim Sir John had much disliked even this mask of murder. He saw their seizure with a grin of delight. He abhorred Richard as the prime mover of the meditated assassination, but he hated Warwick more, who thus could lay an ambush for the life of one who he believed had been a most courteous and soft-hearted jailer to him. He commanded his myrmidons to lead the royal kinsman to the strongest wardrooms of the tower with dogged, savage joy. In dark and separate cells, in solitude and night, these ill-fated victims of craft and ambition were consigned to biting reflection and sinister anticipation. Warwick, worn out by the unusual excitement of the last weeks, by his eager hopes and overwhelming despair, had no one thought, but 10,000 thoughts, making a chaos and hell of his poor heart. Richard felt more for his cousin than for himself. But for me, he repeated internally, he had still been a patient prisoner. Yet to break prison is not a crime capital. He may yet be saved. Elizabeth will intercede. Tudor, for very shame, cannot do further wrong to one so near akin, so powerless and unfortunate. For myself, I am dead already. The Duke of York died when first I became a slave. So that my memory survive in my own white rose's heart, let the victor dispose at his pleasure of this mere shell of Richard. End of chapter 55. Chapter 56 of The Fortunes of Perkin Warbeck by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Lauren Huff. Chapter 56. The Trial. Tempestuous fortune hath spent all her spite, and thrilling sorrow thrown his utmost dart. Thy sad tongue cannot tell more heavy plight than that I feel and harbour in my heart. Spenser. The morning of the 1st of November dawned, a cheery day. Men went into their usual works. The earth, despoiled of her summer garniture, yet bore the change with sober content, for the sun shone, and soft airs, despite the coming winter, lightly shook the scant and altered foliage of the woods. All rose to do the task he set to each, who shaped us to his ends and not our own, and many rose whose woe was such that fear became desire. Among such fate-hunted victims was the Duke of York. Hope had died in his heart, and his few remaining days were only to be spent in celebrating her dark funeral. Morning opened its eyes on Prince Richard's dungeon, showing him vanquished by grievous overthrow and change. To look back through his tumultuous life, to dwell upon its chances, to think of the many who had suffered for him, were sad but fitting thoughts to which he betook himself, till death became lovely in his eyes. But intermingled with such retrospection were other memories. His own sweet love was before him, in her tears or smiles. He looked into her dear eyes, he closed his own, and thrilling kisses pressed his burning lips, and soft white arms were round him. At thought of such he grew impatient of his chains, and the fearful cutting off from all that awaited him. He began to calculate on the probability that his life would be spared, and grew cowardly the while to feed upon those roseate lips, to drink life from those eyes, to clasp his beautiful fond wife, feeling that beyond the circle of his arms naught existed worthy his desires, became a fierce, impatient hunger, to gratify which he would call himself impostor, give up fame and reputation, and become Perkin Warbeck in all men's eyes. There was but one refuge from this battle of youth and life with the grim skeleton. With a strong effort he endeavored to turn his attention from earth, its victor woes, and still more tyrant joys, to the heaven where alone his future lay. The struggle was difficult, but he effected it. Prayer brought resignation, calm. So when his soul, still linked to his mortal frame, and slave to its instincts, again returned to earth, it was with milder wishes and subdued regrets. Monina's lovely form wandered into his mind. She was an angel now, a blessed spirit, he believed, for what deceived her deceived him, and he fancied that he alone had escaped from the watery perils of that night. She had arrived there where he soon should be, in the serene immutability of eternal life. He began in the revulsion of his thoughts to pity those destined still to exist. Earth was a scathed planet, a roofless, shelterless home, a wild where the human soul wandered a little interval, tortured by sharp, cruel storms, lost in thorny, entangled breaks, weary repining, till the hour came when it could soar to its native birthplace and find refuge from its ills in promised paradise. His cell was indeed the haven of peace, compared to the turbid, frightful atmosphere in which his Catherine lived. Edmund had not returned. Every attempt she made to communicate with Scotland or Burgundy failed. She had passed a summer of wretchedness, nor could the tender attention of Elizabeth soothe her. In spite of all, the poor queen was almost happier than she had ever been. For many years she had been the cannibal of her own heart, devouring her griefs in voiceless, friendless solitude. Her very joys, and they were those of maternity, were locked up in her own bosom. It was the birth of happiness to share her griefs with another, that other being so gentle, so wise, and yet so sensitive as the fair white rose, who concealed her own worst pains to soothe those of one possessing less fortitude and fewer internal resources than herself. Yet, while thus she forgot herself, she never quitted in thought her Richard's side, since the day she had seen him delivered over to ignominious punishment, pale and ill. He was, as it were, stamped on every outward object, an image placed between her and her thoughts. For while those were employed apparently on many things, he, in truth, was their first, last, all-possessing idea, more engrossing than her own identity. At one time she spent every effort to obtain an interview with him in prison, and then she learned, through covert means, of the plots carrying on in the tower for his escape, while the name of Warwick, mingling in the tale, roused the latent feelings of Elizabeth. When the last, worst hour came, it was less replete with pain than these miserable, unquiet days, and sleepless, tearful nights, the never-ending, still-beginning round of hours spent in fear, doubt, and agonizing prayer. After a restless night, the princess opened her eyes upon the day, and felt even the usual weight at her heavy foreboding heart increased. The tale was soon told of Richard's attempted escape and failure. What can be done? Nothing. God has delivered the innocent into the hands of the cruel, to whom mercy is as unknown as, methinks, it is even to the awful power who rules our miserable lives. Such words, with a passionate burst of tears, burst from the timid Elizabeth, whose crushed and burning heart even arraigned the Deity for the agony she endured. Catherine looked on her with sweet compassion. "Gentle one," she said, "what new spirit puts such strange speech into your mouth, whose murmurings heretofore were those of piety?" "It is a bad world," continued the queen, "and if I become bad in it, perchance I shall prosper, and have power to save. I have been too mild, too self-communing and self-condemning, and the frightful result is that the sole being that ever loved me perishes on the scaffold. Both will perish, my white rose, doubt it not, your own York and my devoted only loved Edward. In his prison I have been his dream. He breaks it, not to find liberty again, but Elizabeth. Wretched boy! Knows he not that he shall never again find her who roamed with a free spirit the woodland glades, talking to him of the future, as of a scene painted to my will, faded, outworn, a degraded slave? I am not Elizabeth." "Did you know the dearest truth of religion," replied Catherine, "you would feel that she who has been tried, and come out pure, is a far nobler being than—" "I am not pure, not innocent. Much you mistake me," said the queen. "Wicked, impious thoughts harbor in my heart, and pollute my soul even beyond the hope of mediation. Sometimes I hate my beautiful children because they are his. Sometimes in the dark hour of night I renounce my nuptial vow, and lend ready, willing ear to fiendish whisperings which borrow Edward's voice. I court sleep, because he wanders into my dreams, and, what do I say, what am I revealing? Lady, judge me not, you married him you loved, fulfilling thus the best destiny that can be given in this hard world to woman, whose life is merely love. Though he perish in his youth, and you weep for him forever, hug yourself in the blessed knowledge that your fate is bright as angels, for we reap celestial joys when love and duty, twined in sisterly embrace, take up their abode together within us. And I— But, Catherine, did you hear me? They perish even as I speak. His cruel heart knows no touch of mercy, and they perish." "They shall not, dearest," said York's white rose. "It cannot be that so foul a blot darken our whole lives. No, there are words and looks and tones that may persuade. Alas, were we more holy, surely a miracle might be vouchsafed, nor this Pharaoh harden his heart forever." All her love-laden soul beaming in her eyes, with a voice that even thrilled him, though it moved him not, the white rose addressed Henry. She had yet to learn that a tyrant's smile is more fatal than his frown. He was all courtesy, for he was resolved, implacable, and she gathered hope from what proved to be the parent of despair. She spoke with so much energy, yet simplicity, in the cause of goodness, and urged so sweetly her debt of gratitude, telling him how from the altar of their hearts prayers would rise to the Eternal, fraught with blessings to him, that he encouraged her to go on, that still he might gaze on lineaments which nobility of soul, the softest tenderness, and exalted belief in good, painted with angelic hues. At length he replied that his council were examining witnesses, that her cause depended on facts, on its own justice, that he hoped report had blackened the crimes of these rash men. For her sake he sincerely hoped their guilt, as it was detailed to him, had been exaggerated. For a moment the princess was unaware what all this jargon might mean. His next words were more perspicuous. "Indeed, fair dame, you must forget this coil, if I consent, for the welfare of my kingdom, to sacrifice the queen's nearest relative. You also must resign yourself to a necessity from which there is no appeal. Hereafter you will perceive that you gain instead of losing by an act of justice which you passionately call cruelty. It is mercy, heaven's mercy doubtless, that breaks the link between a royal princess and a base-born impostor. A sudden fear thrilled Catherine. "You cannot mean that he should die," she cried. "For your own sake, for your children's sake, on whom your sins will be visited. You cannot intend such murder. You dare not. For the whole world would rise against the unchristian king who sheds his kinsman's blood. All Europe, the secret hearts of those nearest to you, your own knowledge, all proclaim your victim, your rival, to be your brother, and will brand you a fratricide. You are Lancaster. Your ancestors were kings. You conquered this realm in their name, and may reign over it in peace of conscience. But not so may you destroy the Duke of York. His mother avouched him. The Duchess of Burgundy acknowledges him. I was given to him by my royal cousin as to one of equal rank, and he upholds him. More than all, his princely self declares the truth, nor can evil counselors nor false chroniclers stand between you and heaven and the avenging world. You vainly seek to heap accusation on him you term Crookback's head. Time will affix the worst indelible stain upon you. You cannot, will not slay him." What were words to the fixed mind of Henry? A summer breeze whispering round a tempest-withstanding watchtower, he might grow chill at this echo of the fears his own heart spoke. But still he smiled, and his purpose was unshaken. It became known that the princes were to be arraigned for treason. First, the unhappy, misnamed Perkin was tried by the common courts in Westminster Hall. When a despot gives up the execution of his revenge to the course of law, it is only because he wishes to get rid of passing the sentence of death upon his single authority, and to make the dread voice of misnamed justice and its executors the abettors of his crime. When tragedy arrays itself in the formal robes of law, it becomes more heartrending, more odious than in any other guise. When sickness threatens to deprive us of one round whom our heartstrings have twined, we think inextricably, the skill of man is our friend. If merciless tempest be the murderer, we feel that it obeys one whose ways are inscrutable, while we strive to believe that they are good. Groping in darkness, we teach our hearts the bitter lesson of resignation. Nor do we hate nor blame the wild winds and murderous waves, though they have drunk up a life more precious and more beloved than words have power to speak. But that man's authority should destroy the life of his fellow man, that he who is powerful should, for his own security and benefit, drive into the darksome void of the tomb one united to our sun-visited earth by ties of tenderness and love, one whose mind was the abode of honor and virtue. To know that the word of man could still bind to its earthly tabernacle the being, voice, looks, thoughts, affections of our all, and yet that the man of power unlocks the secret chamber, rifles it of all its treasures, and gives us, for the living mansion of the soul, a low, voiceless grave. Against such tyranny the softest heart must rebel, nor scarcely could religion in its most powerful guise, the Catholic religion, which almost tore aside for its votaries the veil between time and eternity, teach submission to the victims. Days float on, however replete with event, the past is but a point to us. However empty, the present pervades all things, and when that present is freighted with our whole futurity, it is as an adamantine chain binding us to the hour. There is no escape from its omnipotence and omnipresence. It is as the all-covering sky. We shut our eyes, the monster's hollow breath is on our cheek. We look on all sides. From each his horrid eyes glare on us. We would sleep. He whispers dreams. Are we intelligible? Will those possessed by present tell us whether any bondage, any Bastille, can suggest ideas of more frightful tyranny, misery than the cruel present, which clings to us and cannot be removed? It is so. He attempted to escape and was discovered. He is low in his dungeon, his dear eyes are faint from disappointed hope. He will be tried. Tyranny will go forth in a mask, and with hideous antics fancy that she mantles with a decorous garb her bloodthirsty axe. He will be condemned, but he will not die, not die. Oh no, my Richard is immortal, he cannot die. My royal cousin, when you gave me to my sweet love, and pledged your word that in weal or woe I should be his, and I promised myself still dearer things, to be the guardian angel and tutelar genius of his life, and took pleasure, fond, foolish girl that I was, in the anticipation of misfortunes that I should rob of all power to hurt. No thought among the many that strayed into futurity told me of this desertion, this impotence of effecting good. Alas, how deaf and cruel man is! I could more easily tear asunder his prison walls with my hands, and break with my weak fingers his iron chains, than move one as liable to suffer and die as even his victim to pity. Elizabeth listened pale and silent to these complaints. Bitter as they were hushed to more heartrending silence when the hour of trial came. She should only pray to die before the word that spoke his condemnation met her ear. Accustomed as a princess, a high-born and respected daughter of one most powerful, to be obeyed and served, to find herself destitute of all influence, seemed to place her in another planet. It was not men, not her fellow creatures that were around her, but fiends who bore the mask of humanity. An uninhabited desert had not been more solitary than this populous land whose language she possessed not, for what is language if it reach not the heart and move it? Richard, the wonder of the time, gathered courage as ill fortune pressed more heartily upon him. In the hour of trial he did not quail, but stood in bold, fearless innocence before the men, whose thoughts were armed against his life. He was not guilty, he said, for he could not be guilty of treason. When the indictment was read, which treated him as a foreigner and an alien, the spirit of the Plantagenet flashed from his eyes, and the very stony-hearted clerk who read, casting his regards on him, faltered and stammered, overawed by a blaze of dignity, which, did we foster antique creeds, we might believe was shed over him by some such spirit as imparted divine majesty to the person of the King of Ithaca. Proudly and silently, Richard listened to the evidence on his trial. It touched only on such points as would afterwards be most material for inculpation of poor Warwick. In the end he was asked what he had to plead, wherefore judgment should not pass upon him. But he was bid to be brief, and to beware not to use any language derogatory to the high and mighty prince, Henry, king of these realms. A smile curled his lips at this admonition, and with even a playful air he said, "My very good lord, I ask for nothing, save that a little mercy be extended to the memory of my gracious uncle, my Lord of Gloucester, who was no child murderer." At the word he was interrupted, and sentence pronounced. As the ignominious words were said, Richard, who from the beginning had abstracted himself in prayer, so that his ears might be as little wounded as possible, by an unconquerable impulse put his hand where his sword might have been. Its absence and the clanking of his chains recalled him to the truth, and he muttered the words, "O basely murdered York," in recollection of his unhappy grandfather, to whose miserable fate he often recurred as an example of suffering and patience. Thus ended the bitter scene, one he had long expected, for which he had nerved himself. During nearly the whole, his look was as if he were absent from it, but who could read the secrets of his heart, while his impassive eyes and lips were no index to the agonies that tortured it? End of chapter 56. Chapter 57 of The Fortunes of Perkin Warbeck by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Lauren Huff. Chapter 57. The Prison of Ludgate. So young to go under the obscure, cold, rotting, wormy ground, to be nailed down into a narrow place, to see no more sweet sunshine, hear no more blithe voices of living thing, muse not again upon familiar thoughts, sad, yet thus lost, how fearful! Shelley. Speak to me, lady, sister, speak, your frozen glances frighten me. Your fingers as I touch them have no resistance or life. Dearest and best, do not desert me. Speak but one word, my own white rose. Catherine raised her blue eyes heavenward. As if the effort were too great, they fell again on the ground as she said, in a voice so low that Elizabeth could hardly catch the sound, "I must see him once again before he dies." "And you shall, dearest, I promise you. Cheer up, my love, not to affright him by looks like these. Indeed, you shall see him, and I will also. He shall know that he has a sister's prayers, a sister's love. Patience, sweet Kate, but a little patience." "Would I could sleep till then," replied the miserable wife, and she covered her face with her hands, as if to shut out the light of day, and sighed bitterly. When our purposes are inflexible, how do insurmountable obstacles break before our strong will, so that often it seems that we are more inconstant than fortune, and that with perseverance we might attain the sum of our desires. The queen, the weak, despised, powerless queen, resolved to gratify this one last wish of her beloved friend. Many a motive urged her to it, compassion, love, and even self-interest. At first she almost despaired. While Richard continued in the Tower, it was impossible. But on the 23rd of November, 2 days before the destined termination of his fatal tragedy, on the day of the trial of poor Warwick, he was removed to the prison of Ludgate, and here, at dead of night, Henry being absent inspecting his new palace at Richmond, Elizabeth, timid, trembling, shrinking now at the last, and Catherine, far too absorbed in one thought to dream of fear, took boat at Westminster, and were rowed along the dark, cold tide to Blackfriars. They were silent. The Queen clasped her friend's hand, which was chill and deathlike. Elizabeth trembled, accustomed to hope for, to seek refuge in her stronger mind. She felt deserted now that she, engrossed by passion, silent and still, the wife of the near prey of death, could remember only that yet for a little while he was alive. Their short voyage seemed endless. Still the oars splashed, still the boat glided, and yet they arrived not. Could it last forever, with one hope ever in view, never to know that he was dead? The thought passed into Catherine's mind with the sluggish but absorbing tenacity of intense grief, and at last possessed it so wholly that it was with a scream of fear that she found herself close to shore. The necessity of motion restored Catherine to her presence of mind, while it deprived the Queen of the little courage she possessed. Something was to be said and done. Elizabeth forgot what, but Catherine spoke in a clear though unnatural voice, and followed their conductors with a firm step, supporting the faltering Queen. Yet she addressed her not. Her energies were wound up to achieve one thing. More than that it would have cost her life to attempt. They reached the dark walls of the prison. A door was unbarred, and they were admitted. The princess passed the threshold with a quick step, as if overjoyed thus to be nearer her wish. Elizabeth paused, trembled, and almost wished to turn back. They crossed the high-walled court, and passed through several dark galleries. It seemed as if they would never arrive, and yet both started when they stopped at the door of a cell. "Does his grace expect us?" asked Catherine. The turnkey looked as not understanding, but their guide, who was the chaplain of the jail, answered, "He does not," fearful that some impediment might intervene, unwilling to disturb by a disappointed hope a soul so near its heavenly home. "I have told him nothing." "Gently then," said Catherine. "Let our speech be low." The door opened, and displayed the soul of the proud, luxurious Edward, sleeping on a wretched mattress, chained to the pavement. The ladies entered alone. Catherine glided noiselessly to his side. Her first act was to bend down her cheek till his breath disturbed the ringlet that rested on it, thus to assure herself that life was within his lips. Elizabeth fixed her earnest gaze on him to discover if in aught he reminded her of the blue-eyed, flaxen-haired bridegroom of Anne Mowbray. He more resembled a picture of her father in his early manhood, and then again her aunt, the Duchess of Burgundy, whom she had seen just before King Edward's death. He lay there in placid sleep, thought and feeling absent, yet in that form resided the soul of Richard, a bright casket containing a priceless gem, no flaw, no token of weakness or decay. He lived, and at a word would come back from oblivion to her world of love. A few days, and that form would still exist in all its fair proportion. But veil it quick, he is not there. Unholy and false is the philosophy that teaches us that lurid mockery was the thing we loved. And now he woke almost to joy, yet sadness succeeded quickly to rapture. "My poor girl," he said, "weep not for me, weep for thyself rather. A rose grafted on a thorn. The degraded and disgraced claims no such sorrow." Catherine replied by an embrace, by laying her beautiful head on his bosom and listening with forgetful, delicious ecstasy to the throbbings of his beating heart. "Be not unjust to thyself," said a soft, unknown voice, breaking the silence of the lovers. "Be not false to thy house. We are a devoted race, my brother, but we are proud even to the last." "This is a new miracle," cried the prince. "Who, except this sainted one, will claim kindred with Tudor's enemy?" "Tudor's wife, your sister. Do you not remember Elizabeth?" As these words were said, Catherine, who appeared to have accomplished her utmost wish, sat beside him, her arms around him, her sweet head reposing, her eyes closed. Kissing her soft hair and fair brow, York disentwined her clasped hands and rose, addressing the trembling queen. "My sister," he said, "you do a deed which calls for blessings from heaven upon you and yours. Till now, such was my unmanly spirit, the stigma affixed to my name, the disgrace of my ignominious death, made me odious to myself. The weakness of that thought is past, the love of this sweetest sweet, and your kindness restores me. Indeed, my sister, I am York, I am Plantagenet." "As such," replied the queen, "I ask a boon for which, selfish as I am, I chiefly came. My brother will not deny me." "Trifler, this is vanity. I can give nothing." "Oh, everything," exclaimed the lady. "Years of peace, almost of happiness, in exchange for a life of bitter loneliness and suffering. You, my dearest lord, know the celestial goodness of that fair white rose. In adversity and peril you have known it. I, amidst the cold deceits of a court. She has vowed never to return to her native land, to bear a questioned name among her peers, or perhaps to be forced by her father to change it for one abhorred. Though she must hate me as the wife of her injurer, yet where can she better be than with your sister? She would leave me, for I am Tudor's queen. Bid her stay with her lord's nearest kinswoman. Tell her that we will beguile the long years of our too young life with talk of you. Tell her that nowhere will she find one so ready to bless your name as poor Elizabeth. Implore her, on my knees do I implore you to bid her not to leave me, a dead alive, a miserable bereft creature such as I was ere I knew her love. What sayest thou, sweet? Asked Richard. Am I yet monarch of that soft heart? Will my single subject obey the crownless Richard? Catherine stretched out her hand to the queen, who was at York's feet, in token of compliance. She could not speak. It was a mighty effort to press the fingers of Elizabeth slightly, who said, Before heaven and your dear lord, I claim your promise. You are mine forever. A precious gift, my Bess. Was it not thus my infant lips called you? I trust her to you, and so the sting of death is blunted. Yet let not too fond a lingering on one passed away tarnish the bright hours that may yet be in store for her. Forget me, sweet ones. I am not. A vapor which death and darkness inhales, best unremembered. Yet while I live I would ask one question. Our victim cousin, Edward of Warwick. Elizabeth could no longer restrain her tears as she related that however weak Warwick might heretofore have seemed, he appeared a Plantagenet on his trial. He disdained the insulting formalities of law, where the bitter Lancastrian, Lord Oxford, was the interpreter of justice. He at once declared himself guilty of plotting to put the English crown on the head of his cousin, the Duke of York. He was quickly interrupted and condemned to be beheaded. Generous, unhappy Warwick, is not life a misery when all of good except ye two angelic creatures die? The signal was now given that the interview must end. Elizabeth wept. Catherine, still voiceless, clung closer to her husband, while he nerved himself to support these gentle spirits with manly fortitude. One long, affectionate kiss he pressed on the mouth of Catherine, and as her roseate lips yet asked another, and another followed. Their lives mingled with their breath. We meet in paradise, mine only one, whispered York. Through our Lord's mercy, assuredly we meet there. He unwound her arms. He placed her in those of Elizabeth. Cherish, preserve her. Bless thee, my sister, thee and thy children. They at least will, by my death, reign rightfully over this kingdom. Farewell. He kissed her hand, and then again the lifeless hand of his wife, who stood a breathing statue. She had not spoken. No words could utter her despair. Another moment, and their fair forms were gone. The door of his cell was closed, and, but for the presence of the God he worshipped, Richard was left alone to solitude and night. End of chapter 57. Chapter 58 of The Fortunes of Perkin Warbeck by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Lauren Huff. Chapter 58. Conclusion. Love is too young to know what conscience is, yet who knows not conscience is born of love? Then, gentle cheater, urge not my amiss, lest guilty of my faults thy sweet self prove. Shakespeare. Time, we are told by all philosophers, is the sole medicine for grief. Footnote. I do not know how far these concluding pages may be deemed superfluous. The character of the Lady Catherine Gordon is a favorite of mine, and yet many will be inclined to censure her abode in Henry VII's court, and other acts of her afterlife. I desired, therefore, that she should speak for herself, and show how her conduct, subsequent to her husband's death, was in accordance with the devotion and fidelity with which she attended his fortunes during his life. End footnote. Yet there are immortal regrets which must endure while we exist. Those who have met with one with whose every feeling and thought their thoughts and feelings were entwined, who knew of no divided past, nor could imagine a solitary futurity, to them what balm can time bring? Time, the giver of hours, months, and years, each one how barren, contemptible, and heavy to bear to the bereft. There was no consolation for Catherine which could make her for a moment forget that her present existence was but the lees of life, the spiritless remnants of a nectarious draught. But Catherine was gentle, good, and resigned. She lived on, dispensing pleasure, adored by all who approached her, and gladly hailing any visitation of happiness which might reach one whose affections were too fondly linked to the grave. Years had passed since the last act of the sad tragedy which destroyed her dearest hopes. She accompanied the Queen of England on a progress made by her, and they remained one night at Eastwell Place, the seat of Sir Thomas Moyle. There was a park and stately pleasure grounds belonging to the house, undulating uplands, shady copses, and sweet-running brooks to diversify the scene. A crowd of the noble and gay were there, and the royal party was unusually mirthful. Fireworks, masks, and dances were employed, and all joyously gave themselves up to the spirit of the hour. The chords of a harp, a well-known air, first awoke in the bosom of the White Rose that languid melancholy, so near allied to pleasure, so close a neighbor to pain. By degrees memory grew busy in her brain. She could no longer endure the laughter of her companions, their sallies, nay, nor their kindness, for Elizabeth perceived her dear friend's change of countenance, and was approaching when Catherine, making her a sign not to remark her, stole away, and entering a straggling path, wandered on, struggling with the tears which the beauty of the evening, and the very hilarity which just before she had shared, caused to gush warm and fast from her eyes. She reached a little streamlet and was passing forward when she became aware of the presence of another in the scene. A laboring man of middle age, but his hair was gray and flowed on his shoulders, was seated on the rustic masonry of a rude fountain, reading. He rose when he saw the lady, and doffed his hat. She, with the cordial sweetness that accompanied her slightest acts, gave him an evening benison. Her voice, her look, her cordial manner, moved to its depths a heart lately hardened against her. As she passed on, the man followed hastily. "Lady," he cried. It struck the princess that this poor fellow had some request to prefer to his master, and that he wished to do it through her medium. She turned with a benevolent smile. "Can I do aught for you, good friend?" His voice failed him. He stretched out his hand which held his book. She took it. The tiny volume was no stranger to her eyes. As if a ghost had looked on her lonely watching, she trembled and grew pale when she opened it, and saw written in fair characters, by a hand now dust, La Rosa Blanca. The rustic knelt before her. "Lady, queen," he cried, "sole relic of the unforgotten, is it thus that we meet? My cousin Edmund!" "Hush, breathe not even to the silent woods the unknown word. Fancy not that I am Plantagenet, for all that was of worth in him you name died when the white rose scattered its leaves upon the unworthy earth." "Ah, would that we had all died in that hour," cried Catherine. "Why, when the ungrateful world lost him, did not all the good and true die also, so that they might no longer suffer?" Plantagenet cast a reproachful glance on her as he said, "Happy indeed are those who die. O God, when I think of the many and the beloved who, a few years ago, were alive around me, and among whose low silent graves I now walk alone, methinks I am dead. It is but the ghost of him you knew that lingers upon earth." "Yes, they are all gone," said the princess, "all who linked me to the past and were portions of my Richard's being. They are gone from before me. But are they truly no more, or do they live like you, brooding over the lost, disdaining to communicate with one who lives but to remember them? Of the death of several I have heard, but often I have longed with bitterness to hear of you, and of the Spanish maiden, Monina de Ferro." "Her gentle soul," replied Edmund, "has flown to join him for whom she lived and died. It is now 2 years since I was assured of this. A friar, whom I had formerly well known, visited Lisbon, and I entreated him to inquire for de Ferro and his child. The commander of the Adelaide was almost forgotten. At last an old sailor was found who remembered that, some years before, he had sailed for the Western Indies and was never heard of more." "His daughter accompanied him?" "In the churchyard of a convent, placed high among the foldings of those lovely hills which overlook Lisbon, he was shown an humble tomb, half defaced. Her dear sacred name is carved upon it, and half the date, the 14, which shows that she died before the century began in which we now live. Footnote: Richard was put to death in 1499. End footnote. She could not have survived our prince many months. Probably she died before him, nor ever knew the worst pang of all, the ignominy linked with his beloved memory. And you, my kinsman, how long have you wedded penury and labor in this obscure disguise?" "Penury and labor," said Plantagenet, "are not confined to the humble occupation I have adopted. I was made poor by the death blow of my hopes, and my chief labor is to tame my heart to resignation to the will of God. Obscure you may indeed call my destination. Would I could shroud it in tenfold night. Dearer to me is the silence and loneliness of this spot where I can forever commune undisturbed with the past, than a pomp which is stained by the blood of him whom once I thought we all loved so well. When, oh, let me name not the frightful thing, when he was gone forever, the whole world was to me but one miserable tomb. I groped in darkness, misery my mate, eternal lamentation my sole delight. The first thing that brought peace to my soul was the beauty of this visible universe. When God permitted for some inscrutable purpose moral evil to be showered so plentifully over us, he gave us 1,000 resources out of ourselves in compensation. If I mingled with my fellow creatures, how dearly should I miss him who was single among men for goodness, wisdom, and heaven-born nobility of soul. My heart sickens at the evil things that usurp the shape of humanity, and dare deem themselves of the same species. I turn from all, loathing. But here there is no change, no falling off, no loss of beauty and of good. These glades, these copses, the seasons change and elemental ministrations are forever the same, the type of their Maker in glory and in good. The loveliness of earth saves me from despair. The majesty of heaven imparts aspiring hope. I bare my bosom to the breeze, and my wretched heart throbs less wildly. I drink in the balmy sweetness of the hour, and repose again on the goodness of my Creator. Yours is another existence, lady. You need the adulation of the crowd, the luxury of palaces. You purchase these even by communing with the murderer of him who deserved a dearer recompense at your hands. Catherine smiled sadly at these last words, which betrayed the thought that rankled in her kinsman's mind. I thank you, she replied, for your details. I will not blame you for the false judgment you pass on me. When years and quiet thought have brought you back from the tempest of emotion that shakes you, you will read my heart better, and know that it is still faithfully devoted to him I have lost. Ah, say those words again, cried Plantagenet, and teach me to believe them. I would give my right hand to approve your conduct, to love and reverence you once again. Will you have patience with me then while I strive to justify myself? Oh, speak, my life, my soul's salvation to hang upon your words. Catherine raised her blue eyes to the now starry sky, as if to adjure that to be the witness of her innocent thoughts. And then she said, We are all, dear cousin, impelled by our nature to make ourselves the central point of the universe. Even those who, as they fancy, sacrifice themselves for the love of God, do it more truly for love of themselves, and the followers of virtue too often see their duties through the obscure and deceptive medium which their own single individual feelings create. Yet we have one unerring guide, one given us at our birth, and which he who died on the cross for us taught us to understand and to appreciate, commanding us to make it the master law of our lives. Call it love, charity, or sympathy, it is the best, the angelic portion of us. It teaches us to feel pain at others' pain, joy in their joy. The more entirely we mingle our emotions with those of others, making our well or ill being depend on theirs, the more completely do we cast away selfishness and approach the perfection of our nature. You are going to answer, perhaps to refute me. Do not. Remember, I am a woman, with a woman's tutelage in my early years, a woman's education in the world, which is that of the heart. Alas, for us, not of the head. I have no school learning, no logic, but simply the voice of my own soul which speaks within me. I try to forget. You force me back upon myself. You attack and you beseech me to defend myself. So to do, I must dwell upon the sentiments of a heart which is human, and therefore faulty, but which has neither guile nor malice in it. In my father's house, and when I wandered with my beloved outcast, I had no difficulty in perceiving, nor, God was so gracious to me, in fulfilling my duties. For in childhood I was cherished and favored by all, and when I became a wife, it was no wonder that I should love and idolize the most single-hearted, generous, and kindly being that ever trod the earth. To give myself away to him, to be a part of him, to feel that we were an harmonious one in this discordant world was a happiness that falls to the lot of few. Defeat, chains, imprisonment, all these were but shows. The reality was deep in our hearts, invulnerable by any tyrant less remorseless than death. If this life were the sum and boundary our being, I had possessed the consummation and fulfillment of happiness. But we are taught to believe that our existence here is but the stepping stone to another beyond, and that death is the beginning of life. When we reach the summit of our desires, then we fall, and death comes to destroy. He was lost to me, my glory and my good. Little could I avail to him now. The caresses, love, and watchful care, the obedience and the heart's sacrifice of a poor thing who groped darkling upon earth could avail naught to a spirit in paradise. I was forced to feel that I was alone, and as to me, to love is to exist. So in that dark hour, in the gaspings of my agony, I felt that I must die, if forever divided from him who possessed my affections. Years have passed since then. If grief kills us not, we kill it. Not that I cease to grieve, for each hour revealing to me how excelling and matchless the being was who once was mine, but renews the pang with which I deplore my alien state upon earth. But such is God's will. I am doomed to a divided existence, and I submit. Meanwhile, I am human, and human affections are the native, luxuriant growth of a heart whose weakness it is, too eagerly and too fondly, to seek objects on whom to expend its yearnings. My Richard's last act was to bestow me on his sister. It were impious to retract a gift made by the dying. We wept together, how long and how bitterly, the loss of our loved one, and then together we turned to fulfill our duties. She had children. They became as dear to me as to her. Margaret I cherish as the betrothed bride of my ever-dear cousin, the King of Scotland. And when I endeavour to foster the many virtues nature has implanted in the noble mind of Prince Arthur, I am fulfilling, methinks, a task grateful in the eyes of Richard, thus doing my part to bestow on the England he loved a sovereign who will repair the usurper's crimes, and bestow happiness on the realm. Nor is this all. Despise me if you will, but I confess that I regard others among those with whom I associate with a clinging affection that forbids me to separate myself from them. Did I not love the noble and good even as he did while Richard lived? Does he not now, in his heavenly abode, love them? And must my living heart be stone because that dear form is dust, which was the medium of my communication with his spirit? Where I see suffering, there I must bring my might for its relief. We are not deities to bestow an impassive benevolence. We give because we love, and the meshes of that sweet web which mutual good offices and sympathy weave, entangle and enthrall me, and force me to pain and pleasure, and to every variety of emotion which is the portion of those whom it holds within its folds. I quarrel not with, I admire those who can be good and benevolent, and yet keep their hearts to themselves, the shrine of worship for God, a haven which no wind can enter. I am not one of these, and yet take no shame therefore. I feel my many weaknesses, and know that some of these form a part of my strength, the reviled part of our nature being a portion of that which elevates us to the godlike. My reason, my sense of duty, my conscientious observance of its dictates, you will set up as the better part. But I venerate also the freer impulses of our souls, my passions, my susceptible imagination, my faltering dependence on others, my clinging to the sense of joy. This makes an integral part of Catherine, nor the worst part of her. When my soul quits this bower of flesh, these leaves and flowers, which are perhaps the growth of it, may decay and die. I know not. As it is, I am content to be an imperfect creature, so that I never lose the ennobling attribute of my species, the constant endeavor to be more perfect. I do not blame you, my cousin, for seeking repose in solitude after much endurance. But unquiet should I feel in the unreplying loneliness which forms your peace. I must love and be loved. I must feel that my dear and chosen friends are happier through me. When I have wandered out of myself in my endeavor to shed pleasure around, I must again return, laden with the gathered sweets on which I feed and live. Permit this to be, unblamed. Permit a heart whose sufferings have been, and are, so many and so bitter, to reap what joy it can from the strong necessity it feels to be sympathized with, to love. End of chapter 58. End of The Fortunes of Perkin Warbeck by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley.